The story follows a lone adventurer who dared to defy a forbidden law. As recorded in an ancient nobleman's diary, consuming monsters was a dire taboo in this world. For any human to eat a monster meant taking in its corrupt and twisted essence. The first sign of the curse was a wave of euphoric ecstasy, paired with a sharp boost in physical power. The second stage brought blinding headaches, wrenching nausea, and a haze of drunken madness. But the final and perhaps cruelest symptom was sudden death from the monster's core. Or worse, the eater turning into a monster themselves. In the dimly lit chamber deep within the labyrinth, a man sat atop a monster's corpse, his hand bloodied and broken. He was savagely tearing into the beast's flesh, ignoring the pain that racked his body. As he swallowed the final bite, his wounds sealed with unnatural speed. In that moment, he unlocked two new skills, Roar and Battle Axe. Consumed by rage, he let out a monstrous bellow that shook the walls around him. The echo surged through the labyrinth, drawing the attention of every lurking beast. Upon hearing the man's roar, nearby monsters stormed toward him, driven by bloodlust and rage. As they lunged from the shadows, he drew his axe with terrifying speed and precision. What followed was a brutal rampage, the man tearing through beasts like a force of nature. No matter how savage their strikes, he cut them down with devastating, cleaving blows. With each kill, he tore into their flesh, consuming it without hesitation or remorse. Their dark essence flowed into him, merging with his own twisted soul. As he fed, new skills awakened within him, amplifying his power with every bite. His body grew stronger, his fury deeper, his slaughter unending. As the man pressed on with his relentless slaughter, he unlocked a torrent of new powers: agility boost, lightning cloak, poison mist, and thread manipulation among them. With ruthless precision, he wielded each skill to carve a path through the unending wave of beasts. Though his strength was immense and his arsenal vast, the overwhelming numbers slowly chipped away at his endurance. Fatigue crept into his limbs, his breath growing heavier with every swing of his axe. Believing he had slain enough to break free of the labyrinth, he allowed himself a moment's pause. But then he saw them, countless monsters still circling him, tightening their hold from every direction. As the man stood surrounded by the oncoming monsters, he steeled his resolve with unshakable determination. In that fleeting moment, he swore he would kill them all, escape the labyrinth alive, and return home, no matter what it cost him. In the frontier city of Bologna, a harsh land riddled with countless labyrinths, one stood apart from the rest: the Miasma Labyrinth. Its foul air drained the strength of any adventurer who dared to step inside, leaving even the strong crawling. Most avoided it entirely, cursing the way it stripped away their power. But one man didn't care. Rude walked into the Miasma Labyrinth like it was home, unfazed by the creeping poison in the air. His fearless persistence earned him a name whispered with awe and disdain: Miasma Scavenger. As Rude stepped into the Miasma Labyrinth, a quiet satisfaction settled in his chest. He had finally reached the 6th floor, and as he scanned the area, he was glad to see miasma grass growing in abundance. This rare herb, prized for its miasma-purifying properties, had become his most reliable source of income. Still, Rude reminded himself to stay cautious, not greedy. He decided to harvest only what he needed, careful to leave enough behind so the labyrinth could restore its supply. Gazing at the miasma grass, he smiled, knowing the 6th floor yield would keep him fed for 3 days. As he moved deeper into the floor, he spotted miasma rats darting between the shadows. Most monsters in the miasma labyrinth were drenched in miasma and laced with venom, which kept adventurers far away. But their poison meant nothing to Rude. He alone was immune to their touch, walking through the corruption like it was mere fog. Rude charged toward the miasma rats, determined to wipe them out quickly. But as he swung his weapon, he began to falter under the sheer number of rats flooding the area. Just as he struggled to keep up, a sudden fireball spell exploded nearby, hurled by an unknown adventurer. The blast missed its mark, letting one of the rats slip away unharmed into the shadows. Rude, startled and irritated, dropped to the ground, trying to process the sudden interference. He turned toward the source of the spell and spotted 3 adventurers standing in the distance. He recognized them instantly: They were faces he had seen around the Adventurers Guild before. A wave of annoyance surged through him at the sight. One of them turned to the spellcaster and remarked bluntly that he should have aimed closer if he wanted to hit anything. At that moment, one of the three adventurers stepped forward, offering Rude a hand and apologizing for the mishap. He introduced himself politely and asked for Rude's name in return. Seeing Rude struggling with the miasma rats, he explained their only intention was to lend a hand. Rude ignored the offered hand and stood up on his own, brushing dirt from his clothes. He thanked the man for the concern, but firmly requested a warning before doing anything that might risk his safety. Irritated, the adventurer snapped back that yelling, "Fireball," was his warning before casting the spell. As the two exchanged words, one of the other adventurers opened a nearby door and called out excitedly. He informed his companions that the room ahead was overflowing with miasma grass. The other two lit up with excitement, eager at the find, but Rude's face darkened at the news, clearly displeased. Rude then asked why they had been quietly trailing him through the labyrinth, hinting they might be after his precious harvesting spot. One adventurer, clearly annoyed, insisted they were just fellow explorers trying to survive, and their paths had crossed by chance. He added they had only come to save Rude from the miasma rats, and that he should appreciate their help. The three glared at Rude with cold disgust, knowing he was too weak to fight back, even if he was right. After a moment's thought, Rude stepped forward, apologized for suspecting them, and thanked them for their aid against the rats. He knew he couldn't win this fight, so he chose to accept the uneasy truce. Back in Bologna, inside a bustling restaurant called Full Belly, two men suddenly shoved Rude to the floor. One scolded him harshly, claiming Rude's foul stench spoiled the taste of the food. He declared Rude banned from the place, saying it was clear he couldn't grasp how much his smell disturbed other patrons. At that moment, one of the men sneered at Rude and declared that a true adventurer was one who could slay monsters. He mocked Rude's worthless skill, abnormal status nullification, and said no matter how hard he tried, had never become a real adventurer. The two men laughed loudly, taunting him mercilessly, while Rude stood silently, unable to reply. Abnormal status nullification was Rude's unique ability. Though handy for exploring the miasma labyrinth, it had a fatal flaw. It offered no combat skills to actually kill monsters, which every adventurer must have. Because of this, Rude had no place in any adventuring party. His lack of offensive power forced him to scavenge the labyrinth's lowest floors, earning him the nickname Miasma Scavenger. This name summed up both his skills' limits and his desperate role. In the end, Rude's useless ability branded him an outcast, not a true adventurer. At that moment, Rude reflected bitterly on his fate, frustrated that as a grown man, he still battled life-or-death fights against mere rats. He returned to his inn and collapsed onto his bed, weighed down by the fear he might remain the miasma scavenger forever. Rude felt crushed by the harsh truth. No one saw him as a true adventurer or gave him respect. He was always looked down upon. The next day, Rude arrived at the Adventurers Guild, thinking about scouting a fresh patch of miasma grass elsewhere, using the money from his last harvest. But the guild buzzed with unusual noise, stirring his curiosity about what caused the ruckus. He approached a staff member and asked if there were any good jobs available. Recognizing him, she called him the Miasma Scavenger and shared astonishing news. A new labyrinth had just been discovered. Rude's eyes widened at the revelation. A fresh labyrinth promised untapped treasures and rare magical items, a golden chance for any adventurer. Thrilled, he saw it as the opportunity to rewrite his destiny and shed his current lowly status. Rude soon realized why the guild buzzed so loudly. Everyone was hyped about the newly discovered labyrinth. As he scanned the crowded room, the woman cut in, warning that the price of miasma herb, which he usually sold, would start to fall immediately. Rude was confused at first, but quickly grew anxious after hearing her words. He asked why the herb price would drop. The woman explained that the miasma labyrinth had never been popular, and with adventurers rushing to the new labyrinth, demand for the miasma herb would plummet. Prices were bound to sink. As Rude weighed his options, the woman added that the new labyrinth lay deep in the Yahello mountains, but he wouldn't be allowed in. Shocked, Rude asked why he was banned from entering. She showed him a poster listing the rules. Only adventurers ranked D or higher could enter. Since Rude was only E rank, he didn't qualify. Looking worried, Rude told the woman he was determined to explore the new labyrinth and asked if there was any way to qualify for entry. The woman sighed deeply, explaining that the rules were strict and he had to meet the requirements to get in. She warned that even if he slipped inside, He would likely die alone due to his weak strength and lack of a party to back him up. Rude couldn't argue. Her words cut to the core of his reality. Just then, an adventurer named Bayer stepped forward from behind and suggested that if Rude truly wanted to enter the new labyrinth, he should join Bayer's team as a porter. Bayer smiled warmly at Rude, who returned the look with a mix of confusion and curiosity. After a short while, Rude sat in a carriage with Bayer's team, heading toward the newly discovered labyrinth. Breaking the quiet, Bayer turned to Rude, expressing how pleased he was to have met him. He explained he had been searching for someone to carry materials from a new labyrinth, but struggled to find help. Bayer felt relieved and glad to have finally found Rude for the job. Rude, meanwhile, thought Bayer's difficulty might stem from all adventurers rushing to the new labyrinth, making porters scarce. As he mused, one of Bayer's companions, a red-haired woman named Sasha, voiced her doubt. She asked Bayer why they bring a miasma scavenger like Rude and suggested they should have picked someone else. Another companion, a burly man named Rick, agreed, questioning Bayer's choice and hinting they should have hired a more capable porter. Bayer then turned to his two companions, warning them not to badmouth Rude. He explained that, given Rude's experience, it was better to have him along than an inexperienced rookie. Changing the subject, Bayer apologized to Rude for not introducing himself sooner. He revealed he was Bayer, leader of the Scarlet Sword Group, and introduced Rude to his teammates, Sasha, the red-haired woman, and Rick, the burly man. Bayer then told Rude they were all D-rank adventurers. In reply, Rude said he was E-rank. Bayer said he wanted to know more about Rude's status before entering the new labyrinth and asked if Rude could show his guild card. Rude agreed, pulling out his guild card and handing it over to Bayer. Rude's guild card showed he was a level 7 E-rank adventurer with 4 different skills. Bayer studied the card and asked if Rude could use fire magic, since one of his skills was indeed fire magic. Rude admitted his fire magic was too weak for battle, but said it helped in dark places and cooking food. Bayer smiled and assured him that even weak skills had their value. Moments later, the four arrived at the new labyrinth's entrance. Bayer, Rick, and Sasha buzzed with excitement as Bayer declared they had reached the Yahello labyrinth. Sasha, full of energy, said they might be among the first arrivals. But Rick urged haste, insisting they begin exploring right away. As the door opened, they were shocked to see the labyrinth already packed. Hundreds of adventurers swarmed inside, grabbing loot and making the place feel overcrowded. Sasha felt a wave of irritation and disappointment wash over her as she saw the massive crowd ahead. She had anticipated being among the first to enter the labyrinth, but it was obvious they were already late. Assessing the scene, Bayer informed his group that most of the initial floor had likely been cleared by earlier explorers. He cautioned them that lingering in the first layer would probably yield little to no valuable finds. Rick tried to cheer Sasha up, telling her not to lose heart and proposing that they head to the lower levels that remained mostly untouched. The idea immediately brightened Sasha's mood, and she agreed enthusiastically, eager to explore new territory. However, Rude suddenly spoke up, advising that since the labyrinth was still newly found, it would be smarter to carefully chart the first floor before diving deeper. As soon as Rude shared his opinion, Sasha and Rick cut him off abruptly, brushing aside his words and declaring that they didn't need advice from a mere porter. They went on to say that Rude had no authority to speak on such matters. Rick added mockingly that this attitude was exactly why Rude was stuck as an E-rank adventurer. At that point, Bayer intervened, firmly telling Sasha and Rick to stop belittling Rude. He reminded them that Rude's remark was meant constructively and that his advice deserved consideration. Though Bayer stepped in to halt Sasha and Rick's harsh remarks, he ultimately sided with their reasoning. He told Rude that lingering on the upper floors would yield little progress. Bayer went on to explain that if they wanted to uncover rare and worthwhile treasures, they needed to venture further into the labyrinth's depths. After some time, the group of four managed to descend to the 4th floor of the labyrinth. During their encounters with monsters, Rude had a hard time fending for himself, while the other 3 handled the creatures with relative ease. Rick grinned and told Rude not to let the weaker monsters scare him. Watching their smooth coordination, Rude couldn't help but think that Bayer, Rick, and Sasha were far more capable than he was, effortlessly taking down enemies that left him trembling. Anxiety gripped him so tightly that his hands wouldn't move, leaving him frozen and unable to face the monsters properly. He found himself completely unable to assist his team or make any real contribution to the fight. Before long, the trio had wiped out all the monsters in the area. Sasha commented that venturing deeper had been the right call and expressed relief that no other adventurers were present at their level. Bayer nodded in agreement, mentioning that while the monsters hadn't posed much of a challenge, they had still managed to uncover some valuable loot on the 4th floor. At that point, Rick barked at Rude, ordering him to gather the remains from the monsters he had slain as well. Rude responded that he couldn't harvest anything useful since the bodies were too badly damaged, and most of the monster cores were already destroyed. Irritated, Rick demanded that Rude at least check for anything salvageable, reminding him not to slack off and emphasizing that, as their porter and a lowly E-rank adventurer who dealt with miasma, it was his job to handle such tasks. Though Rude disliked taking orders from Rick, he didn't dare defy him after seeing how powerful Rick had proven to be in battle. Reluctantly, Rude acknowledged the command and began collecting the remains of the monsters Rick had taken down. As he moved closer, he noticed that the corpses were shredded beyond recognition, their insides spilling out and filling the air with a foul stench. Rude couldn't help but wonder why Rick had been so excessively violent in his attacks. Deciding it would make the task easier, he cast a small flame spell, hoping to burn away parts of the carcasses and reduce the stench while retrieving what materials he could. When Rick saw Rude using fire magic on the monsters, he joked to the others that Rude might be roasting the meat to eat it himself. Chuckling, he added that after spending so much time exploring, he was starting to feel hungry and the idea of grilled monster meat didn't sound too bad. Sasha quickly interrupted him, telling Rick to drop the topic, saying that the thought of eating monster flesh was revolting to her. Sasha reminded Rick that consuming monster meat was forbidden among adventurers, as the lingering magic within the flesh could seep into the body and cause unpredictable side effects. Rick chuckled, assuring her that he was only teasing. He added that once they got back, he intended to spend his earnings on proper food and indulge in a real feast. However, before he could finish speaking, the air around them shifted as a deep, thunderous roar reverberated through the labyrinth's halls. The group froze, turning toward the sound, only to be met with the sight of an enormous minotaur emerging from the shadows. The creature's presence was terrifying, B-rank monsters like it weren't supposed to appear anywhere near the 4th floor, making its arrival all the more shocking. Panic spread among them as they grasped the reality of the situation. They were hopelessly outclassed. Every one of them understood that facing a B-rank monster at their level was suicide, and their only hope lay in finding a way to survive or escape. In that instant, Bayer shouted at Rude to hand over his backpack, claiming he needed its supplies to confront the Minotaur. Startled, Rude obeyed without hesitation and quickly passed it over. He then asked Bayer what he planned to do and whether he had a strategy for their next move. But as Bayer took hold of the pack, a dark smirk formed on his lips. Before Rude could react, Bayer drew his blade and slashed across Rude's back, sending him collapsing to the ground, writhing in pain and bleeding profusely. The malicious gleam in Bayer's eyes made it clear that his intentions were far more sinister than Rude could have imagined. After striking Rude down, Bayer called out sharply to Rick and Sasha. Reacting instantly, Rick hurled a weapon resembling a throwing axe and activated a spell known as Warrior's Rally. The magic redirected the Minotaur's aggression, marking the wounded Rude, who lay groaning on the ground, as the creature's new target. At the same time, Sasha cast haste upon herself, Rick, and Bayer, greatly enhancing their speed to ensure a swift escape. Writhing in agony, Rude weakly demanded to know if their plan had always been to abandon him. Bayer, grinning coldly, admitted that Rude had been brought along only to serve as bait, and that his role had ended once danger appeared. Rude's expression twisted in disbelief as the truth sank in. As the trio sprinted away, they yelled for him to hold the monster off and stall for their getaway. Trembling with fury, Rude shouted after them, cursing their betrayal and condemning them for sacrificing him just to save themselves. Meanwhile, the Minotaur, under the influence of the spell, turned its murderous gaze toward Rude. Terror gripped him as he desperately searched for a way out, but before he could act, the monster slammed its massive weapon into the ground, sending a shockwave that threw him high into the air. Though Rude narrowly dodged the main impact, a grim smile crept onto his face. He knew the situation was hopeless. His chances of surviving were nearly non-existent, yet he steeled himself for what was to come. In the next instant, the Minotaur lunged forward with immense strength, bursting through the stone wall and dragging Rude into another section of the labyrinth. The force of the collision shattered the wall completely, hurling them both into a new chamber. There, The floor suddenly gave way, and they plummeted through a massive hole beneath them. Moments later, Rude hit the ground hard, his body screaming in pain as darkness clouded his vision. Slowly regaining awareness, he blinked weakly, uncertain if he had truly survived the fall or if he was already dead. Rude turned his head slightly and noticed that he had landed directly on top of the Minotaur's corpse. It dawned on him that they had fallen together through the hole, and the monster's massive body had absorbed most of the impact, sparing him from certain death. His momentary relief, however, faded quickly as he accepted the grim truth that even though the Minotaur was dead, his own life would soon end as well. Rude reflected that even if no other creatures appeared, he was doomed to die from his injuries, blood loss, or sheer starvation. Resting atop the fallen beast, his body screamed with hunger, and his mind drifted toward the forbidden idea of consuming the Minotaur's flesh. He knew it was madness, an act that could bring nothing but ruin, but the image of a man from his past, who once told him to never surrender no matter how unbearable life became, resurfaced in his thoughts. Clinging to that memory, Rude forced himself to act and began devouring the Minotaur's body in a desperate bid to live. When a human drained of magic consumes the flesh of a creature overflowing with magical energy, the monster's essence seeps into their veins, corrupting them from within and transforming them into something neither human nor beast. This state, known as monsterization, is feared as a fate worse than death, a curse of uncontrollable mutation. Yet with no other choice, Rude gambled everything, eating the Minotaur's meat to restore his strength, unknowingly setting off a terrifying change within himself. Not long after, Rude rose to his feet and wandered through the labyrinth, dragging an axe along the ground. His once normal eyes now glowed crimson, and his aura had become monstrous, his humanity slipping away under the Minotaur's lingering magic. In that moment, he unleashed his ability, Roar, sending a crushing wave of fear across the area. The surrounding creatures collapsed instantly, their lives extinguished by the overwhelming force. Following that, Rude invoked physical boost, heightening his strength to unnatural levels, and tore through every nearby monster with a single devastating blow. Then, he activated echolocation, allowing him to perceive life forms around him even in pitch-black darkness. As the skill revealed a swarm of approaching enemies, a twisted grin spread across Rude's face. Raising his weapon, he challenged them with a chilling laugh, asking which one among them would be the next to be devoured. At that instant, Rude lost all restraint, plunging into a frenzy of bloodlust as he tore through every creature that dared to cross his path. In the midst of the chaos, he realized that the battle axe he had taken, the same one Rick had tossed aside earlier, felt perfectly balanced in his grip as if it were made for him. He soon noticed another strange change. He could sense the flow of magic around him, detecting the presence of monsters without relying on sight. Consumed by an uncontrollable hunger, Rude continued his merciless rampage, cutting down and devouring every monster he encountered. With each carcass he consumed, raw power surged through his veins, his strength multiplying beyond comprehension. A wild grin stretched across his face as he reveled in the intoxicating energy coursing through him. Rude could feel that no creature in the labyrinth posed a threat to him anymore. Eventually, the massacre ended, and he stood before a massive stone door, the labyrinth's exit. With a heavy push, he opened it and stepped into the open air. The sensation of the breeze against his skin filled him with relief, and for the first time in what felt like forever, he smiled. A victorious shout burst from his throat as he declared to the world that he had survived the labyrinth and emerged alive. Meanwhile, far away at the Adventurers Guild, a grim tension filled the hall as unease spread among those gathered. Standing before Bayer, Sasha, and Rick was a stern-looking man questioning them. This man was Lankars, the guild master of the Bologna branch. After listening to their account of what had transpired inside the labyrinth, Lankars explained that he had summoned every adventurer who had returned from the expedition, except Rude, who was still missing. Wearing a somber, guilt-ridden expression, Bayer solemnly told Lankars that when they had reached the 4th floor and encountered the Minotaur, Rude had been slain before they could do anything to save him. Bayer continued spinning his fabricated story, claiming that they all deeply regretted failing to recognize how perilous the 4th floor truly was, which had ultimately led to Rude's tragic demise. Rick and Sasha played along perfectly, their faces painted with false grief as they pretended to mourn their fallen companion. After listening to Bayer's explanation, Lankars gave a grave nod and said he understood what had happened. He then announced that, effective immediately, no one would be allowed to enter the newly discovered labyrinth, declaring it far too dangerous for further exploration until more information was gathered. Just then, the guild doors swung open, and Rude walked in, causing a wave of shock to ripple through the hall. Gasps filled the air as adventurers stared in disbelief. Everyone had been certain that Rude had died inside the labyrinth. No one was more shaken than Bear, Rick, and Sasha, who froze at the sight of the man they had left for dead, now standing before them completely alive. Acting quickly, Bear forced a smile and rushed toward Rude, exclaiming with feigned joy, "I can't believe it! You actually made it out alive." As he leaned close, his expression darkened for a moment, and he whispered in Rude's ear, threatening to kill him if he dared to reveal anything. A moment later, Rick and Sasha hurried over, wearing exaggerated smiles and pretending to be relieved. Sasha claimed that they had tried to go back for him, but that the labyrinth's passage had collapsed, making rescue impossible. Rude, however, stood motionless, his expression unreadable, refusing to respond to their lies. Trying to steer the attention away, Bear suddenly clapped his hands and enthusiastically suggested they celebrate Rude's miraculous survival and escape from the Minotaur. He proposed that they move the party elsewhere, saying the guild wasn't an appropriate place for it. But just as the group began to leave, a strange stillness overtook them. They suddenly realized they couldn't move a muscle. Taking advantage of the moment, Rude finally spoke, his voice cold and unwavering as he declared before everyone that Bear, Rick, and Sasha had deliberately used him as bait inside the labyrinth. The entire guild fell silent in shock, while Bear's face turned pale as he desperately tried to think of a way to salvage the situation before everything unraveled. Bear, visibly unnerved, stepped toward Rude and demanded to know what he was implying, pretending not to grasp the meaning of Rude's words. Before he could continue, Lancaster interjected, his voice sharp, asking Rude to explain exactly what he meant when he claimed that Bear, Rick, and Sasha had used him as a pawn. Turning to face Lancaster, Rude calmly recounted the truth. How Bear had stolen his pack and struck him from behind, how Rick had used a skill to draw the Minotaur's fury toward him, and how Sasha had cast haste only on the others, ensuring their escape while leaving him behind to die. The room fell silent as the details spilled out, and the three culprits stood frozen, their faces pale with fear as the weight of their betrayal was laid bare. In a panic, Bear turned toward Lancaster, insisting frantically that Rude's story was nonsense and that they had done nothing of the sort. Lancaster regarded him with a hard stare before stating that the truth would be determined soon enough. At that moment, a woman entered the hall, her presence commanding immediate attention. She was the truth officer, a figure so rarely seen outside the royal capital that her sudden arrival left the entire guild in stunned silence. Lancaster explained that, because of the unusual number of porters who had died while temporarily working with Scarlet Sword, he had summoned the truth officer to conduct a full investigation. Hearing this, the three grew increasingly hysterical, while Rude remained composed, knowing justice was finally at hand. The truth officer, expression unreadable, studied the group carefully before casting her truth-detecting spell. Moments later, she announced her findings in an even tone. Bear, Rick, and Sasha of the Scarlet Sword were lying, while Rude's account was genuine. A collective gasp echoed through the room. Bear's composure shattered completely as he pointed a trembling hand toward her, shouting that she was wrong and insisting she didn't know what really happened, his voice breaking as he accused her of lying. Lancaster raised his voice, addressing the stunned crowd as he explained that the truth officer's ability was an exceedingly rare gift, one that could not be learned or replicated through normal means. He stated that her power functioned on the same level as a unique skill, incapable of being deceived or bypassed by any form of falsehood. Casting a sharp glare at Bear, Lancaster added that the words of someone who had sworn their abilities in service to the kingdom were beyond question, leaving no room for doubt. Bear, realizing the implications, stood frozen in terror, his mouth opening and closing wordlessly as panic overtook him. Lancaster then turned his fury on the trio, shouting that they had broken one of the most sacred taboos among adventurers, betraying and abandoning a companion. He accused them of deliberately wounding an ally and treating their comrade as expendable. His voice echoed through the hall as he declared that once their actions were formally recorded, the punishment was inevitable. Their adventure licenses would be revoked, and they would be condemned to slavery. Sasha shrieked in terror at the announcement, her voice trembling, while Rick stood motionless, his expression blank with shock as reality began to sink in. Bayer, teeth gritted, muttered under his breath that it was impossible for someone like him to end up as a slave. His gaze hardened as it fell upon the truth officer, and bitter resentment filled his thoughts. If she hadn't been here, they might have escaped judgment. Overcome with rage, Bayer suddenly unsheathed his blade and lunged toward her, intent on cutting her down. Gasps of horror erupted around the guild as his sword swung forward. But before it could strike, Rude moved instantly, stepping in front of the truth officer and blocking the attack with a resounding clash of steel. With eyes blazing and his voice dripping with fury, Rude glared at Bayer and warned him not to dare lay a hand on the truth officer. Bayer froze, completely shocked that Rude had successfully intercepted his attack. Without hesitation, Rude retaliated with a devastating punch that sent Bayer hurtling through the air. The blow was so powerful that Bayer smashed through the Adventurers Guild wall, tumbling a great distance before coming to a stop. Rick and Sasha gawked in disbelief, unable to process the sheer magnitude of Rude's strength. Standing tall, Rude exuded confidence, clearly pleased with how effectively he had neutralized Bayer. Shortly afterward, Rude found himself in the guild's reception area, speaking with Lankars. The guild master offered a polite apology, noting that Rude must be exhausted after the harrowing events inside the labyrinth. Rude waved off the concern, assuring Lankars he was unharmed, and then asked about what had become of the other three. Lankars explained that guild staff had taken them into custody for questioning. He further clarified that if the investigation confirmed they had repeatedly treated porters as expendable bait, the Scarlet Sword members would lose all their belongings and adventurer licenses, ultimately being sentenced to slavery. Lankars added that Bayer had even dared to defy the truth officer, meaning he would likely never be seen again. He also noted that all rights to the profits from the new labyrinth had been revoked from the three Scarlet Sword members. Consequently, Lankars said every reward would now be awarded to Rude alone. Rude's eyes widened in astonishment as he heard he was to receive 200,000 reins, the full reward from the new labyrinth, originally intended for the three other adventurers. The sheer scale of the fortune left him stunned, realizing he would claim the entire sum by himself. After a short while, Rude exited the reception area and stepped outside, a wide grin spreading across his face. He thought to himself that with this kind of money, covering all his daily expenses would be simple. Reflecting on how long it would take to earn the same sum through painstaking collection of miasma grass, Rude appreciated the immense rewards adventuring could bring. As he strolled along, he noticed no other adventurers were approaching him. He guessed this was likely due to the spectacle he had caused earlier. Even if they continued to avoid him, he reasoned it didn't necessarily mean they were friendly. Rude then considered that drawing too much attention to himself might make other adventurers suspicious of his sudden fortune. He resolved to continue earning steadily in the miasma labyrinth as he had before. Determined not to dwell on what had happened, Rude decided to focus on moving forward. With his newfound wealth, he could finally afford better gear and the luxury of eating whatever he pleased. Excited about the possibilities, he decided his first stop would be a tool shop to purchase the equipment he needed. While wandering through the bustling market, Rude noticed a magical bag that caught his attention. However, he chose to grab something to eat first before worrying about acquiring it. The following day, Rude returned to the miasma labyrinth and resumed hunting rats. He was struck by how effortless defeating the miasma rats had become compared to before. Rude let out a sigh, reflecting that just 2 days prior, he would have had to evade 5 of these creatures, yet now he could dispatch them without difficulty. At that moment, he activated his appraisal skill to examine the miasma rats and assess their condition. He was pleased to see that the skill allowed him to clearly view each monster's stats. Rude realized that the ability he had gained from consuming a particular monster could be applied not only to living foes, but also to their corpses. At that moment, Rude began to wonder just how much his overall stats had improved. He reflected on how effortlessly he had been dispatching the miasma rats and guessed that his level might not have risen dramatically, perhaps reaching only around level 20. Intrigued, he opened his status screen for a closer look. To his complete shock, Rude discovered that his level had jumped to 42. Not only that, but his health, strength, endurance, and agility had all seen remarkable increases. Stunned by the sudden leap, especially considering he had been only level 7 the previous day, Rude realized this was an extraordinarily rare occurrence. Curious to explore further, he decided to review the new skills he had obtained. As he examined his recently acquired abilities, Rude felt a surge of excitement at the number of skills he had gained. Thrilled by the possibilities, he recalled that the walls destroyed during his battle with the Minotaur had now been repaired, and the new labyrinth would remain closed for a while. Planning to spend the day lightly exploring the miasma labyrinth, Rude was eager to put his enhanced powers to the test. He was curious to see how well his abilities would perform on the lower floors, and he also intended to try out the magic bag he had bought, carefully selecting the first monster for experimentation. After weighing his options, Rude resolved to delve into the deeper sections of the miasma labyrinth. He cleared the 6th floor with ease and then moved on to the 9th and 13th floors. While fighting the monsters on these levels, he realized that they no longer posed a sufficient challenge for his boosted strength. Determined to find more formidable opponents to truly test his abilities, he pressed onward. Soon, Rude reached the 24th floor of the labyrinth. As he navigated this level, he spotted a monster nearby. Concealing himself, he activated Appraisal to analyze its stats. He discovered it was a lizard soldier from the Dragon Tribe, level 25, equipped with 3 distinct skills. Observing the lizard soldier's stats, Rude realized that these creatures normally operated in coordinated groups. Since only a single lizard soldier was visible, he judged it a worthwhile target. Moving silently, he crept behind it, drew his sword, and delivered a strike to its back. The hit caused damage, but it was insufficient to eliminate the creature entirely. Rude grinned, noting that the lizard soldier wasn't especially strong, and resolved that his next attack would land without fail. At that moment, the wounded lizard soldier attempted to flee in panic. Rude pursued it, shouting for it to stop. Eventually, the creature reached a dead end, with no route left to escape. As Rude closed the distance, he told the lizard soldier that it had nowhere to run. Yet when it finally turned to face him, its posture suggested it was no longer afraid. In that instant, Rude realized he was in serious danger. Glancing behind him, he saw multiple lizard soldiers encircling him and understood immediately that he had been lured into an ambush. Despite the apparent level difference, the odds were suddenly overwhelming. One of the soldiers swung its sword at him, but Rude ducked just in time to avoid the strike. Quickly evaluating the situation, he concluded that, given the trap and the numerical disadvantage, his only viable strategy was to eliminate the lizard soldiers one at a time. In that instant, Rude swung his sword and struck one of the lizard soldiers, knocking it hard onto the floor. As he moved to finish the creature, another lizard soldier stepped in, using its shield to intercept his blow. Rude was momentarily stunned by the creature's well-timed defense. Just then, a different lizard soldier lunged at him from behind, but Rude's reflexes allowed him to dodge the strike just in time. Scanning his surroundings, Rude realized he was completely encircled by lizard soldiers. He noted to himself that while these monsters were known for their teamwork, he had not anticipated such advanced ambush tactics or the level of precision in their coordination. As he weighed his next move and continued engaging the lizard soldiers, a sharp, high-pitched noise caught his attention, preceding the monster's synchronized attacks. Following the sound, he spotted a red-scaled lizard soldier standing at a distance, intently observing the fight. Rude activated his appraisal skill to analyze the red lizard soldier and discovered it was a general lizard, level 32 of the beast classification. Among its abilities, the most dangerous was command, which allowed it to control the movements and attacks of all the other lizard soldiers. A thrill ran through Rude as he realized he had located the leader of the group. At that very moment, the general lizard let out a deafening roar, signaling the other lizard soldiers to strike in unison. Unfazed, Rude activated Physical Boost, channeling tremendous power into every strike. With renewed strength, he cut through the swarm of lizard soldiers and surged directly toward the general lizard. As Rude swung his blade at the general lizard, he was shocked to see that the attack had no effect. It seemed as if the creature was completely impervious. The general lizard immediately countered with a devastating sword strike, and realizing he couldn't withstand it normally, Rude activated his steel body skill. The attack struck him, but caused no damage. Grinning with confidence, Rude faced the general lizard and proclaimed that he wasn't the only one with a hidden advantage. He had a secret of his own. Rude then used appraisal again, puzzled by why his attack had failed to affect the general lizard despite the force he had put behind it. Inspecting its status, he noticed no skills that would boost its defense or resilience. Rude deduced that another lizard must be using a protective skill to shield the general lizard. As he scanned the other lizard soldiers, he spotted one that was badly injured. Upon checking its status, he discovered it possessed a skill called Substitute, which absorbed damage intended for the general lizard and prevented harm from reaching it. Reacting immediately, Rude dashed to the lizard soldier with the Substitute skill and destroyed it without hesitation. With the protection removed, the general lizard's composure faltered, realizing it could no longer resist Rude's attacks. Roaring angrily, the general lizard commanded all remaining lizard soldiers to strike him at once. But as they advanced, Rude activated his thread manipulation skill. Using his power, Rude drew all the lizard soldiers into a single cluster, making them easier to control. He then cast a spell that ensnared them in a binding trap, leaving them completely immobilized. Satisfied, Rude turned his attention to the general lizard and announced that its fate was sealed. With a swift, precise movement, he decapitated the general lizard, ending the battle in an instant. After a short while, Rude had eliminated every lizard soldier in the vicinity. He grinned, knowing it was time to make use of the creatures he had slain. Reaching into the magic bag he had bought with his guild rewards, he retrieved the supplies he needed. The bag, enchanted to expand its storage and lighten its contents when closed, had quickly become an indispensable tool for him. Rude then pulled out his cooking gear and seasonings, ready to prepare the monster meat from the fallen lizards. He reflected on his time exploring the hidden floors, where survival had always been his only concern. Despite the constant danger, he had secretly wanted to try cooking monster meat. Now, with the ingredients prepared, he admired how appealing the meat looked and anticipated a delicious taste. Eagerly, he grabbed a piece and took a bite, his face lighting up in delight as the flavor exceeded his expectations. The taste was far better than he had imagined, and he mused that he might quickly develop a taste for monster meat. While enjoying the meal, Rude realized that he had also gained several new skills, many of which were quite remarkable. He wondered how such powerful abilities had come to him and considered that they were likely connected to the magical energy of the monsters he had consumed. Thinking over his growing skill set, Rude noted that the armor spider ability from the Minotaur was particularly strong. The evil eye skill from another monster also proved extremely useful. In addition, he had acquired several other potentially potent skills from creatures he had not yet tested. Filled with anticipation, Rude resolved that on his way back, he would deliberately consume as many different monsters as possible to expand his repertoire of abilities. On the 21st floor of the Miasma Labyrinth, Rude continued to eliminate the various monsters he encountered, steadily absorbing their powers by consuming their bodies. With each defeated creature, he acquired a growing array of abilities, including venom, temperature shift, poison scale powder, among many others. As Rude savored a piece of the cooked monster meat, a sudden, unusual noise echoed from behind him. Pausing, he tried to pinpoint the source of the sound. It became increasingly clear, a loud, crashing commotion, vaguely humanoid in nature. Rude wondered if another group of adventurers had managed to reach such a deep floor. Wasting no time, he packed his gear into the magic bag and hurried toward the source of the noise, curious to discover who, or what, was waiting ahead. Rude considered that encounters with other adventuring parties were extremely rare, and he entertained the thought that he might even be able to exchange useful information if he was fortunate. As he drew nearer, he spotted a woman wearing a cloak, her hand bleeding, collapsed on the floor. She was encircled by a group of shady-looking men who clearly meant her harm. One of the men muttered in disbelief about how much magical energy the woman still had despite her injuries. Another, visibly bruised and battered, commented that their predicament was dangerous because she was an elf. He added with a mix of curiosity and greed that the elf woman might be extremely valuable. At that moment, Rude raised his voice, remarking that while he had hoped to meet fellow adventurers, he was far from satisfied with the scene before him. The men froze at his sudden interruption, but Rude pressed on, admitting he didn't know all the details, yet could not simply watch a woman being assaulted. The apparent leader demanded to know who Rude was, and he calmly replied that he was an adventurer. The elf woman then shouted urgently at Rude, telling him to stay back and warning that the men surrounding her were adventurer hunters. Rude was briefly taken aback by her caution. He had always understood adventurer hunters to be highly skilled and dangerous. Curious, he activated appraisal to check their stats, only to find that no information could be retrieved. He speculated that they might be using powerful concealment magic or perhaps anti-magic devices. At that instant, the leader commanded his men to eliminate Rude immediately. Without hesitation, one of them charged, swinging his sword with lethal intent. Rude was momentarily stunned by the man's speed, but managed to block the attack just in time. During the skirmish, the man commented that Rude was holding his own surprisingly well. Rude, unshaken, replied that it was only because the man was weak. Infuriated, the attacker shouted that he was far from weak and launched a more aggressive series of strikes, threatening to crush Rude's skull. In response, Rude activated his venom skill, spitting it directly onto the man's face. The man screamed as the venom burned his skin, writhing violently on the floor. Everyone present froze in shock, unable to believe that Rude could project venom from his mouth, and they began to regard him more as a monster than a mere adventurer. Rude reflected that his combat approach was wild and unorthodox, completely unlike the disciplined style of a typical adventurer. Yet for someone as frail as he had been, survival demanded exploiting any advantage to eliminate threats. At that moment, the man doused in venom lay lifeless on the ground. Observing this, the leader immediately recognized that Rude possessed a rare poisonous skill and realized they had underestimated him. Determined to avoid repeating the error, the leader commanded his men to strike simultaneously, intending to crush Rude and eliminate any chance of retreat. As the men assaulted him relentlessly, Rude dodged each blow, knowing that even a brief pause could cost him his life. There was no room for error. While he briefly recoiled, the leader seized the opening and delivered a tremendous strike. At the last instant, Rude activated Steel Body, hardening himself against the force and narrowly avoiding severe injury. The leader's powerful kick sent Rude flying backward. Surprised, the leader thought that the strike should have been fatal, noting that Rude was unexpectedly resilient. As one of the men advanced, he threatened to kill Rude instantly. But as he approached, Rude abruptly spun around and sprinted away. The man shouted for Rude to stop and gave chase, only for the leader to call him back, warning that both he and Rude were now treading across a hazardous poisonous swamp. The leader cautioned that venturing further would be perilous, with no guarantee of survival. He added that Rude wouldn't last long in the swamp either, and eventually, he would be forced to retreat. Watching them from a distance, Rude considered how long they intended to linger by the swamp's edge. Realizing stalling was futile, he resolved to confront them directly, choosing to engage as any capable adventurer would. Rude considered how lucky he was to have taken refuge in the poisonous swamp. Beyond its toxic properties, the swamp's mist sapped an adventurer's energy at a rapid pace, which worked entirely in his favor. Minutes passed, and the men grew increasingly alarmed that Rude had remained within the swamp for so long. One of them, gasping for breath, asked how much longer Rude intended to stay in the poisonous environment. 10 minutes had already passed, and even though they hadn't entered the swamp themselves, the fumes were beginning to make them feel nauseous. Meanwhile, Rude, who had ventured even deeper into the swamp, seemed completely unaffected. At that point, Rude decided it was time to act. He had waited long enough for the swamp's effects to weaken his opponents, but he also realized that any further delay could worsen the elf woman's critical condition. Moving toward the group, Rude asked how they were holding up under the poison and the swamp's magical influence, inquiring if they were struggling at all. One of the men scoffed, remarking that Rude had finally left the swamp and caused them a great deal of trouble. Calmly, Rude replied that, unfortunately for them, he was immune to status effects, so he could not fully appreciate the discomfort they were experiencing. The leader froze as he realized that Rude had a status immunity skill and had cleverly tricked them. He immediately ordered his men to strike and kill Rude on the spot. One of the men lunged forward, but the swamp had sapped much of his strength, and Rude easily blocked the strike. Smiling, Rude taunted his attacker, explaining that the poison had steadily drained their stamina and the magical residue in their bodies had lowered their overall stats. Suddenly, another man struck from behind, but Rude activated Steel Body, and the sword passed harmlessly through him, leaving the attacker in disbelief. Taking advantage of the moment, Rude unleashed Lightning Cloak, swiftly eliminating both opponents with a single, decisive strike. One of the men, struggling to breathe, yelled at Rude and tried to rush him again. But Rude instantly used Aerial Slash, cutting the man down before he could take another step. The leader froze in fear, unable to understand how a human could use so many monster-type skills. Turning his gaze toward him, Rude said he didn't owe anyone an explanation and charged straight at the man. As they clashed, the leader realized that even though he was supposed to dominate any human in battle, he was clearly no match for Rude. Panicking, he activated Agility Enhancement to boost his speed, shouting that someone like Rude could never defeat him. But the moment he swung his sword, Rude struck with such force that the blade snapped clean in half. The leader stood there in disbelief, unable to process that he had been overwhelmed so easily. In the next second, Rude sliced through both the man and his broken weapon, leaving him motionless on the ground. Looking at the corpse, Rude commented that if the man hadn't been crippled by abnormal status effects, he would have been much tougher. But thanks to Rude's own ability to ignore those effects entirely, victory had come easily. Rude finally managed to rescue the elf woman, and the two walked side by side through the swamp. She thanked him sincerely, admitting she had no idea what she would have done without his help, and Rude simply said he couldn't ignore someone in danger. While watching her, he noticed she was trying to look calm, even though her body still showed signs of the swamp's poison magic, and he couldn't help wondering why an elf would be wandering alone in such an isolated place or why adventurer hunters were after her. As they moved forward, a monster suddenly burst out of the swamp in front of them, and with one quick use of his appraisal, Rude identified it as a Mosfaz Great, the moth leader and a level 37 threat. Rude dashed at it immediately, thinking its huge size wouldn't be enough to intimidate him, just before the beast released its own aerial slash attack, which he smoothly avoided. He quickly checked on the elf, and when she assured him she was unharmed, he turned back to the monster with a smirk, saying he would give it a scare since it had managed to startle him for a split second. The monster shot upward, trying to stay out of Rude's reach, but Rude yelled after it that running wouldn't help. He fired off his own aerial slash, slicing into the creature and leaving it badly wounded. Enraged, the monster countered with its paralyze ability. Rude just grinned and told it the attack was useless on him since he couldn't be paralyzed at all. Then he suddenly panicked when he remembered the elf woman, worried she might be affected, but when he glanced back, she was already shielding herself with wind magic, easily stopping the attack, which left Rude genuinely impressed. After a fierce exchange of blows, Rude ended the fight with one clean, crushing strike that brought the monster down for good. The elf woman walked toward him, amazed that poison and paralysis had no effect on him, saying his abilities were oddly similar to those of monsters, which made Rude scratch his head awkwardly as he tried to figure out what to say. Then she suddenly clutched her stomach and collapsed, leading Rude to think she had been hit after all, but she assured him it was something else entirely and promised to explain everything once they made it out of the labyrinth. A short while later, the two of them sat beneath a tree outside the miasma labyrinth. The elf woman let out a relieved smile, saying she finally felt normal again now that they had escaped that place. Before telling her story, she said she wanted to introduce herself properly, and with a calm voice, she told Rude her name was Alicia and that she used to be an adventurer. Rude froze in surprise and asked if she was truly Alicia from the Emerald Storm. Laughing softly, Alicia confirmed that she was indeed the very person he had heard about. Rude mentioned that the kingdom of Lydia's famous S-rank party, Azure Trails, was well known everywhere, and everyone remembered its members. But 5 years earlier, that same party had been crushed by monsters. Hearing his words, Alicia explained that on that terrible day, they had challenged the creatures hiding in the deepest layer of the S-rank abyssal labyrinth. During the fierce battle, their leader died. Another member was forced to retire because of fatal wounds, and one more was lost inside the labyrinth forever. Alicia added that she also hadn't escaped unharmed, and she quietly showed him a mark on her chest as proof. Rude panicked when she started loosening her clothes, but when he looked closely, he noticed a strange purple stain on her skin. Alicia told him the mark was a curse she received during that fight, a curse called Level Down. Rude felt completely confused since he had never heard of anything like that before. Alicia admitted she was just as clueless, saying she had tried every cure she could find but had only managed to slow the curse's effect instead of removing it. Alicia explained that those adventurers knew about her curse and wanted to use it for their own gain, and she admitted she was terrified of dying once her level dropped to 0, unable to stand the idea of being controlled by them. Hearing this, Rude suddenly realized something and told her there might be a way for her to fight back, remembering his substitute skill that let him take on another person's attacks and status effects. He asked if she would allow him to try it, leaving Alicia confused but willing to go along with whatever he had planned. Once she agreed, Rude placed his hand on her and used substitute, and Alicia felt the curse inside her start to shift toward him, making her panic and beg him to stop before it hurt him. Rude simply gave her a calm smile and told her to trust him, insisting he would be fine. Then a dark, eerie force appeared behind him, leaving Alicia stunned as she watched the scene unfold. And the moment Rude's skill took effect, his abnormal status nullification triggered, wiping out the curse completely and freeing Alicia from the burden that had been dragging her down for years. Alicia stared at him in utter disbelief, asking what on earth had just happened, and Rude calmly told her to check her guild card. The moment she looked, her eyes went wide as she realized her status had returned to normal and the curse was completely gone, leaving her stunned that she was finally free. Rude explained that had taken a gamble, hoping his abnormal status nullification would erase the curse once he pulled it onto himself, and he felt a huge wave of relief knowing it had worked exactly as Head hoped. Alicia glared at him with a mix of annoyance and admiration, scolding him for being reckless enough to risk his life for someone he barely knew, but her anger quickly softened as she admitted she was truly grateful, thanking him with a sincere smile. Rude gently placed his hands on her shoulders and told her not to worry anymore, assuring her that he had helped her simply because he wanted to, nothing more. Rude and Alicia sat together in the full-belly restaurant, happily eating and drinking, and Alicia praised both the food and the alcohol, teasing that Rude clearly knew the best places to visit, while Rude awkwardly remembered the last time he had been thrown out of the same place and asked if she should really be drinking after everything she'd been through. But Alicia confidently told him she was fully healed and that a moment like this deserved a proper celebration, urging him to drink as much as he wanted. Curious, Rude asked what she planned to do next, and after thinking for a moment, Alicia smiled and said she first wanted to know more about him, asking why he had chosen the life of an adventurer, and Rude took a slow breath before explaining that years ago monsters had attacked his village, taking everyone he cared about. But in the middle of that tragedy, an S-rank adventurer had appeared and saved his life. And Rude said he would never forget the way that heroes smiled at him in the middle of such darkness, a moment that pushed him to follow the same path. Rude told her he wanted to rise to S-rank, just like the hero who once saved his life, hoping to rescue countless others the same way someday. Hearing his honest dream, Alicia gave him a soft smile and said it was a goal worth chasing. When Rude nervously asked if she planned to laugh at him, she shook her head and explained that she too had once aimed for S rank, and now she wanted to become even stronger than she was before the curse ruined her. She also believed her old teammates were still trapped deep inside the abyssal labyrinth, and no matter what happened, she planned to return there and face those monsters again. Since both of them needed more strength to reach their goals, Alicia suddenly proposed that they team up and form a party. Before Rude could answer, two familiar men walked over from behind. One grabbed Alicia's hand with a smug grin and joked that Rude had found himself a stunning partner. Rude immediately recognized them as the same troublemakers who had thrown him out of the restaurant before. One of the men told Alicia she shouldn't waste her time with someone as dull as Rude. And at that moment, Rude grabbed the man by the shoulders, eyes blazing with fury, and ordered him to take his hands off Alicia. The man was furious at Rude for talking back, and just when it looked like they were about to start a fight, Alicia stepped between them and insisted they calm down, reminding them they were standing in a pub and suggesting that if they wanted to prove something, they should see who could outdrink the other instead. The entire place roared with excitement at the idea, eager to watch the showdown and find out who would win. The three of them kept drinking nonstop, and before long, both men were too drunk to stay awake and collapsed on the floor, while Alicia remained perfectly steady. The crowd cheered loudly as she was crowned the champion, and she and Rude exchanged a proud look and gave each other a thumbs up, celebrating their completely unexpected victory. After some time, Rude and Alicia stood off to the side of the pub, and Rude praised her, saying she handled herself amazingly, especially after everything she had already drunk. With her cheeks flushed, Alicia mumbled that she only held out because Rude had helped her, and she refused to sit quietly while those men tried to mock him. Right as she finished speaking, the alcohol finally overwhelmed her, and she fell asleep straight into Rude's arms. Smiling at her helpless state, Rude quietly activated his substitute skill, drawing all the alcohol from her body into himself. Alicia snapped awake, surprised to find her head completely clear, and Rude calmly told her he had shifted all her drunkenness onto himself using his skill, leaving her totally sober. Delighted, Alicia grabbed his hand and shouted that first he took her curse, then her intoxication, calling his ability amazing and insisting even more that they had to team up no matter what. A moment later, she happily suggested they should celebrate by drinking again now that she felt fine, but Rude gently reminded her not to overdo it. Feeling let down, Alicia turned to the restaurant owner and complained that she still hadn't been able to taste any of the special dishes. The owner then explained that monsters had taken over the Barnamos fishing grounds, and though he had asked the guild for help, all the strongest adventurers were already busy with other missions, leaving him without the ingredients he needed. Hearing that, he asked if Alicia and Rude would be willing to accept the job and clear out the monsters in the Barnamos fishing grounds. Rude and Alicia arrived at the Barnamos fishing grounds the next morning, taking in the calm scenery while feeling a mix of curiosity and excitement. Alicia cheerfully told Rude they should finish off the monsters as fast as possible so they could hurry back to the restaurant and finally enjoy the special dishes. Rude agreed with a grin, eager to complete the request and enjoy the reward waiting for them. Just then, Rude noticed something shifting beneath the water, and his excitement grew as he realized they had spotted their target. However, both of their expressions quickly changed when they noticed the water around them rippling. Dozens of shapes lurking just beneath the surface had completely surrounded them. Sensing danger, Rude quickly used his appraisal skill, discovering that the creatures were called Jernibs, mostly around level 23, each with 3 skills: high-speed swimming, water bullets, and snipe. Without warning, the monsters unleashed a barrage of water bullets at them, attacking from every direction. Rude struggled to dodge in the cramped little boat, realizing there was barely any room to move as the rapid-fire shots kept coming. Rude suddenly came up with a bold plan and leapt straight into the water, laughing as he dared the monsters to attack him however they pleased. As the Jernibs rushed toward him, he activated Lightning Cloak, releasing a burst of electricity that tore through the entire swarm, instantly frying every creature around him. When he resurfaced, Alicia shouted his name in fear, but he calmly told her he was completely fine. After checking the waters, Rude noticed that even though most of the monsters were gone, a handful still lingered in the deeper areas nearby. What confused him was why those remaining creatures refused to strike, making him wonder if they were being cautious or guarding something important. He called out to Alicia, telling her he planned to dive even deeper to figure out what was going on, and after asking for her help, he tied a rope around his chest. Taking a steady breath, he plunged into the depths, and the farther he went, the clearer the truth became. Those Jernibs weren't attacking because they were protecting something. A massive shape soon emerged from the darkness, and Rude quickly used his appraisal skill, revealing the creature's name as Tentacles, a level 38 monster with 4 deadly abilities and intimidating stats, making it obvious that this giant beast was the guardian of whatever lay hidden in the depths. As Rude stared at the enormous creature, he couldn't help but marvel at its gigantic size. The more he looked, the clearer it became. This monster was the one creating all the smaller Jernibs. He quickly understood that fighting the little ones was useless if the big one kept churning out more. If he wanted everything to end, he had to defeat the giant tentacles once and for all. Since the huge monster wasn't attacking immediately, Rude figured he had a brief moment to get ready. But before he could plan anything, one of its long limbs shot forward, wrapped around his legs, and pulled him toward its gaping mouth. In that split second, Rude realized the truth. The smaller monsters had held back on purpose, tricking him so the main threat could catch him off guard. Right then, the tentacle monster lunged toward Rude, and with his air running out, he felt himself starting to sink deeper underwater. Panicked, he tugged on the rope tied around him, signaling Alicia for help. Acting instantly, Alicia unleashed her wind magic, sending the boat racing forward and ripping Rude out of the monster's grip. Once he burst through the surface, Rude sucked in air desperately, coughing hard from all the water he had swallowed. Alicia leaned over him, worry written all over her face, asking if he was all right. Rude finally managed to sit up, panting, and thank her sincerely for pulling him out just in time. Rude told Alicia there was a boss hiding deep underwater that kept spawning Jernibs nonstop, and things were even worse because the boss had an acceleration heal skill, which made it almost impossible to damage. Alicia shot back that the monsters had the upper hand in the water and that her magic couldn't reach that far because of the distance and the water blocking it, then asked if Rude had any sort of plan. Rude answered that there was one risky move they could try to fix the situation. At that point, Rude knew he had to make a choice because Alicia had trusted him enough to reveal her curse and even decided to team up with him. So he felt he should be honest and tell her his own secret as well. With a serious look, he made Alicia swear not to talk about what he was about to reveal or what he was going to do next. After a short moment, Rude jumped back into the water to confront the tentacle monster and, as he dove deeper, he activated his new skill, high-speed swimming. Rude drew his sword and quickly cut down many of the smaller monsters protecting the big tentacle beast. The tentacle tried to swipe at him, but thanks to his new skill, high-speed swimming, Rude dodged every strike with ease. Moving fast, he got closer and landed a strong hit on the creature. At the same time, he powered up his lightning cloak and struck again, finishing off the monster. Looking at the fallen giant, Rude thought the fishing grounds would finally be safe again. But he couldn't stop worrying about Alicia. He wondered what she'd think after seeing him tear through a monster like that. Would she be impressed or scared? When Rude surfaced, he looked around but didn't see her anywhere. He smiled sadly, assuming she'd left already. Just as disappointment was sinking in, a voice called out that he was late. Rude turned to find Alicia waiting for him, proving she hadn't gone anywhere after all. Alicia looked at Rude and said he didn't seem hurt, so she guessed he had beaten the big monster. Rude nodded, confirming her guess. Smiling, Alicia bent down to pick up some sticks, telling him she was relieved nothing bad had happened and that she couldn't sit still because she was so worried. She explained she was gathering wood for a fire to help dry his wet clothes. Then, Rude changed the subject and asked if she was really okay staying with him after seeing him eat the monsters. Alicia smiled softly and said she was surprised at first, but glad he trusted her enough to share his secret. She added that it didn't bother her at all. In fact, it made her happier to know he confided in her. Rude was surprised and thanked her for trusting him and sticking by his side. Then, Rude pulled out a piece of rope and told her why he had come back with part of the tentacle monster. He said he wanted to gain the monster's powers, so he cut off a piece to eat and absorb its skills. Rude grinned and told Alicia it wouldn't be right if he was the only one eating, so he had also caught a Barnamos fish just for her. Seeing the fish, Alicia's face lit up with excitement, and she eagerly said she couldn't wait to try it. Rude laughed at her enthusiasm and promised to tell her the story of the first time he ever ate a monster while they enjoyed their meal. After a little while, the food was ready, and Alicia took a bite of the fish, commenting that it was surprising Rude actually ate monsters, and that there was a special reason behind it. Rude explained that eating monsters helped him grow stronger, getting closer to his dream, even though he used to be a weak D-rank. Alicia smiled softly and said the cooked monster meat looked pretty tasty. Rude agreed excitedly, adding that monster meat was surprisingly good, and even though he didn't need to eat it for skills anymore, he was curious about the flavor. To his joy, it turned out delicious. Then Rude asked if she wanted to try the monster meat, but Alicia said she wasn't sure if she'd survive eating it, so she'd stick to the fish he caught. Changing the subject, Alicia asked again if Rude would join her party. Surprised, Rude wondered why she wanted him, since as an S-rank adventurer, she probably knew stronger people. Alicia explained that it had been 5 years since the curse, and even if her old teammates were alive, many might have quit adventuring because of how long it had been and their natural age limits. Alicia said most adventurers on the front lines were a bit crazy, and even though they were strong, she didn't trust them to have her back. She wanted someone she could truly count on during her journeys. Reaching out her hand to Rude, she said that if it was him, she'd feel completely safe and worry-free. Rude smiled and told her he'd be happy to join her party right away. Outside the Adventurers Guild, Alicia excitedly told Rude they needed to prepare for their first mission together. Rude, being an E rank, wasn't sure they'd get any important jobs, but Alicia brushed that off, saying they should at least register their party at the guild first. Since she was S rank, she believed bigger missions would open up for them. Inside the guild, they went to the counter and told the receptionist they wanted to sign up as a party. Alicia handed over her status card, ready to get started. The receptionist's eyes widened when she saw Alicia's card, realizing she was a powerful S-rank adventurer and part of the famous Emerald Storm. Looking over both Alicia's and Rude's cards, she asked Alicia why she'd want to team up with someone like Rude, who was just a lowly miasma scavenger. Alicia gave her a sharp glare, which made the receptionist quickly stop questioning and admit she got the message. Alicia explained that she wanted to help Rude level up and asked what he still needed to do to improve. After checking Rude's record, the receptionist said he had plenty of achievements, but what he really needed was a stronger battle record. Hearing this, Alicia asked if there was a tough mission they could take on together to boost Rude's combat experience. The receptionist nodded and handed them a suitable job. Soon after, Rude and Alicia arrived near Barona, where their task was to hunt down a pack of wolves. Rude used his appraisal skill to check the wolves and found they were level 11 gray wolves. He then activated his stealth skill, sneaked behind them, and swiftly took down each wolf with precise sword strikes. While fighting, Rude told Alicia to watch out for any wolf reinforcements, and she agreed, ready to handle her part of the battle. Alicia called on her special skill, summoning Sylphide, her spirit magic, to boost her power. Rude watched in amazement as she unleashed Great Wind, a fierce gust that cut down all the charging wolves in one clean sweep, knocking them out instantly. Stunned by how strong her attack was, Rude thought no one could possibly dodge something that powerful. Alicia then mentioned she wasn't even using her full power yet, even though the curse was gone. Rude felt both impressed and a bit nervous, wondering just how much destruction she could cause if she got all her strength back. Suddenly, a gray wolf jumped at Rude from behind. He couldn't dodge in time and got ready for the hit. But right then, Alicia used her spirit magic Sylphide again and cast a spell. The The wolves got confused, looking around for Rude and Alicia, but then saw them floating in the air. Rude was thrilled and amazed at her skill and thanked her for saving him. Alicia smiled and said he shouldn't thank her. It was Sylphide, the spirit magic, that really saved him. Alicia looked toward the gray wolves and warned Rude not to relax just because they were low level. She spotted 5 more wolves hiding in the nearby bushes. Alicia warned that even more might be hiding beyond those, so Rude needed to stay alert, ready to help. Rude said it was his turn to find the hidden wolves. He used his echolocation skill to detect where the wolves were hiding in the thick brush. Focusing hard, Rude was shocked to discover about 30 gray wolves waiting just out of sight. Knowing they still had a lot of wolves to fight, Rude grinned confidently, sure he could handle them all. He told Alicia to strike the spots he pointed out, and she agreed without hesitation. As Rude guided her attacks, Alicia sliced through the bushes with her skill. Rude thought that while his echolocation wasn't perfect in open areas, Alicia couldn't hit multiple places at once very well either. But if they attacked from the sides together, they could force the wolves into one spot, making it easy for Rude to take them all down with one powerful strike. After Alicia finished gathering the gray wolves into one spot, Rude dove down and used his paralyzing breath skill, freezing all the wolves in place. With them unable to move, he quickly took them out one by one. A little later, Rude counted their kills and realized they had defeated 52 gray wolves in total. Alicia was shocked to see so many in just one day, and Rude guessed the wolf numbers must have grown a lot lately. Rude then asked if the magic she used before was spirit magic, and Alicia confirmed it was. She explained that she draws power from spirits found in nature. Although these spirits are everywhere, they don't always show themselves. Alicia said that to use their power, she has to give back some magic as payment. She added that even with only a little magic energy, she could still cast strong spells. As Rude saw earlier, she could even do amazing things like float in the air. Rude told Alicia he had never seen wind magic as powerful as hers before. Right then, the playful spirit suddenly grabbed Rude's hair and started pulling it for fun. While the spirit seemed to be having a great time, Rude winced and begged it to stop hurting him. Alicia couldn't help but laugh at the funny scene of Rude struggling with the cheeky spirit. She explained that Sylphide loved causing mischief, which was why it was teasing him. Noticing the sky darkening, Alicia said it was time to head back. She called on her spirit's power, and both of them began to float into the air. Alicia told Rude they would fly home together today. As they soared above, Rude shouted that this was the most amazing feeling he had ever had. Curious, Rude asked Alicia about other types of magic she could use. She said besides wind, she was skilled in water, ice, light, and earth magic. But she warned that spirits of fire and darkness didn't get along with her. Alicia explained that when a spirit and a user don't match well, the spirit might demand lots of magic energy or even refuse to lend power. Rude smiled and said that Sylphide must really like Alicia since she didn't need much magic to use her skills. Alicia nodded, agreeing with him. As they flew closer, Rude noticed smoke rising from a nearby village and quickly pointed it out to Alicia. When they arrived, they saw many homes burning and villagers running in panic. The chaos was caused by a fierce monster called the Baphomet. The village adventurers looked shocked and overwhelmed. They had only expected to deal with gray wolves, so this powerful beast caught them completely off guard. Suddenly, the Baphomet summoned a spear and threw it straight at 2 adventurers standing nearby. Just before it hit, Rude quickly fired a water bullet, knocking the spear off course and saving the adventurers. The Baphomet scowled at Rude, clearly angry about the interruption. Alicia stepped up and checked if the adventurers were okay, and they nodded, assuring her they were fine. She told them she and Rude would take care of the monsters and asked for an update on what was happening. Meanwhile, Rude used his appraisal skill on the Baphomet and learned it was level 27 with 5 strong abilities. Even though it was lower level than the lizard head fought before, the Baphomet stats were much higher. As Rude studied its powers, he realized just how dangerous this monster really was. Right then, the Baphomet activated its 2 powerful skills, Fire Magic Principles and Earth Magic Principles. Watching this, Rude realized the fire magic he knew was weak and not useful in real fights. He thought that if he could defeat this monster and eat it, he might gain its strong magic and become much stronger in battle. With that goal, Rude swung his sword, but the Baphomet easily blocked and dodged using its sharp claws. He thought about fighting harder, but before he could make a move, the monster launched a storm of fiery spears toward him. Alicia shouted out to check if Rude was okay, her worry clear but he skillfully avoided all the fiery attacks. She asked again if he was all right, and Rude reassured her confidently. Watching closely, he saw the Baphomet had only 2 fire spears left, save for defense. Rude knew this was a really tough fight. At that moment, Alicia suggested they share what they noticed, pointing out that the Baphomet was very alert and ready for anything. Alicia told Rude that the villagers hadn't left yet, so she had already asked the other adventurers to help get them to safety. She wanted to avoid causing any extra damage during the fight. Rude knew that Alicia's magic must be running low after their battle with the Grey Wolves, so he couldn't count on her powerful spells this time. He realized he had to take the lead. Alicia promised Shed focus on blocking the Baphomet's magic, while Rude kept attacking no matter what. Every time the Baphomet cast a spell, Alicia quickly stopped it by using the opposite magic, making the attacks useless. Frustrated, the monster switched to earth magic, but Alicia quickly blocked that with her wind magic. Rude was amazed at how carefully she used just enough magic to cancel the monster's strong spells, showing why she was an S rank. Taking advantage, Rude boosted his strength with his physical boost skill and chopped off some of the monster's fingers. The Baphomet tried to fight back, but Alicia unleashed a powerful strike that made the monster's body explode into pieces. Far away, the villagers and adventurers nervously talked about the huge explosion they had just heard. One adventurer worried about Alicia and Rude, unsure if they had beaten the monster or if they had been defeated. Another adventurer felt bad. He couldn't help because he was still hurt. Suddenly, Alicia appeared, thanking everyone for helping with the evacuation. The adventurers sighed in relief, seeing she was safe. Alicia told them she and Rude had won the fight, but she was still concerned the monster might be alive and could come back to attack the village. She said she planned to go after it. Alicia then asked for a small favor. One adventurer eagerly offered to help with anything he could. Smiling softly, Alicia asked if they could spare some food because she was very hungry. A little later, in the forest near the village, Rude sat alone by a campfire, the monster's body lying close by. Alicia came over and told him she was back from the village. Rude was glad she returned and asked how the villagers were doing. Alicia said thanks to the adventurers, everyone had gotten away safely. Alicia told Rude she had explained to the villagers that they were chasing the Baphomet, so no one would get suspicious about the missing monster's body. Rude apologized for making her lie, but thanked her for helping anyway. His eyes then landed on the monster's corpse, and excitement bubbled up inside him at the thought of cooking and eating it. After preparing the meal, Rude took a bite and found he had gained all the Baphomet skills. Alicia commented that although the meat looked tasty, watching someone eat a humanoid monster was a little creepy. Rude agreed and felt a bit uneasy about how used he was getting to eating monster meat without thinking twice. Suddenly, a big group of monsters called Stampings rushed toward them. Rude was shocked. They had faced way too many monsters in just one day. He quickly stood up and told Alicia he wanted to try out the new powers he had gained from meat. But when he tried to use his skills, nothing happened. None of his powers would activate. Just then, the monsters attacked, but Rude and Alicia dodged skillfully. Alicia said she thought Rude would have been able to use magic by now, but he still couldn't. She added that her own magic was almost gone, so she couldn't help much this time. Rude was furious and told Alicia he wasn't going to let the monsters get away with ruining his meal. Alicia looked confused and asked why he was so upset. He explained that he had spent a long time draining the blood and cleaning the meat carefully to make it taste good. Now, after all that hard work, the monsters had scattered the food everywhere, ruining it. He was determined not to forgive them for messing up his feast. Alicia still didn't understand why he cared so much about monster meat. Then Rude yelled at the monsters, telling them they should pay up and give him their meat instead. Just as he was about to rush forward, Alicia grabbed him from behind and told him to calm down. She warned him that the monsters had a skill called Flash Step, which made their attacks super powerful and dangerous, even if they were low level. Alicia said they needed to keep their distance for now and suggested they pull back. Rude wasn't happy about retreating, but knew she was right, so he agreed, trying to hide his frustration. After a short break, Rude and Alicia climbed up a tree to stay safe from the monster pigs below. Alicia then asked Rude why he couldn't use his magic earlier. Rude said he had never had this problem before with skills for monsters, so he didn't know what was wrong. Alicia told him to try using his appraisal skill to check. Rude agreed, and after looking at his skills, he told Alicia that the system said he should understand them naturally. Alicia then joked that if he still couldn't use the magic, maybe his brain just wasn't made for it. Rude was surprised and said she was being pretty mean. Alicia thought about why Rude couldn't use magic and had an idea. Maybe he needed to learn how to control mana first to use the monster skills properly. Rude began to understand the problem. He told Alicia he would give it a try. Closing his eyes, he remembered the first time he ate the Minotaur and how he had unlocked its power by fully connecting with it. Rude suddenly understood that if he could tap into the energy inside him, he might be able to use the magic. He opened his eyes wide and realized he could finally control the magic that had been locked away before. A rush of excitement filled him as he realized that once he could feel the mana, he could use it like it was part of himself. Feeling stronger and more sure, Rude launched a fierce attack at the monsters waiting below. After finishing off all the monsters, Rude took a break to enjoy the meat he had cooked from their latest fight. As he chewed on the diced pork, he told Alicia how tasty it was and apologized for making her wait while he ate. Alicia smiled and said it was okay, knowing he needed to regain his strength. She then explained that to use magic properly, he had to rely on mana instead of just raw magic power. Noticing that his mana hadn't dropped much after his attacks, she guessed that Rude could keep using his skills without getting tired quickly. Rude nodded and told her that once he felt mana flowing inside him, he instantly knew how to activate his abilities. He added that if mana could take the place of magic power, then maybe he could use it to make his body stronger or even boost his weapons. He went on to say that many adventurers focus on building their magic power and use it in battle by channeling it through their bodies, which makes them physically stronger. When this magic flows into their weapons, it can make their attacks stronger or even create powerful energy slashes. Hearing this, Alicia realized that Rude's low magic power, until now, was why he couldn't use those advanced skills before. Rude nodded, agreeing with Alicia's thoughts and adding that he now had much more than just magic power. He also realized he could refill his mana by eating monsters. Just as he said this, he took a bite of the monster meat, and a message popped up telling him he had learned a new skill called Flash Step. Watching him, Alicia guessed that Rude could soak up mana from food and store it inside his body. But her attention soon drifted to the delicious smell of the meat, making her mouth water. Seeing Alicia staring and almost drooling as he ate, Rude teased her, asking if watching him enjoy the meal made her hungry too. Before she could answer, a huge explosion went off nearby, shocking them both. When the smoke cleared, they saw a giant monster standing right in front of them. Realizing it was the boss, Rude warned Alicia. Suddenly, the monster launched a fast and powerful strike. Quick on his feet, Rude used his new Flash Step skill to grab Alicia and dodge the attack just in time. Alicia thanked Rude for saving her, but couldn't stop thinking about how the boss monster had suddenly appeared right in front of them just as she sensed something coming from afar. She wondered why such a strong monster would show up here, especially since they weren't inside a labyrinth. Meanwhile, Rude was furious. His food had been ruined again, the second time that day. Angry, he pointed at the boss and yelled for it to stop messing with him and his meal. Alicia laughed and teased him, saying at least a monster could make a tasty roast. Rude wasn't convinced. He said the boss had fire resistance, so even if it caught fire, it wouldn't care. Checking its stats, he saw it only had 2 skills, Flash Step and Fire Resistance, but its stats were pretty impressive. Ready to finish the fight fast, Rude used his principles of earth magic and attacked. To his shock, the monster shrugged off the hit and charged at him. Surprised, Rude tried to use his steel body skill, but before he could, the monster's powerful strike hit him hard, sending him flying back. When Rude was hit by the monster's blow, Alicia shouted out, worried for him. But before she could rush over, the monster turned its focus toward her instead. Thinking fast, Alicia called on her spirit, Sylphide, and launched a strong attack. The hit connected, but it wasn't enough to take down the beast. She felt a brief relief, but soon noticed the monster wasn't using any fancy powers. It was just its thick fur and strong muscles that blocked her magic. She quickly realized that neither her earth magic nor Sylphide's wind could pierce through its tough skin. The monster shook itself off and got ready to attack Alicia again, knowing her spells wouldn't hurt much. Just then, Rude woke up and instantly used his skill, Roar. His loud yell stunned the monster, freezing it in place. Standing firm, Rude warned the monster not to turn away because the fight wasn't over yet. Thinking it through, Rude knew he couldn't rely on Flash Step or Steel Body right now. He also realized if the fight dragged on, the monster would try to attack Alicia again, and he wasn't about to let that happen. Rude knew he didn't have a skill strong enough to take down the monster with one hit. Watching the beast, he noticed it only charged straight at its target. Feeling determined, Rude decided to try something he had never done before in a fight. He closed his eyes, lifted his sword, and focused, ready to give this new move a shot. The monster rushed at him, and Alicia watched nervously as Rude stood still with his eyes shut tight. But Rude stayed calm, pulling mana from inside him and imagining it flowing into his sword. As the monster got closer, Rude opened his eyes and swung hard. His sword sliced the monster clean in half in one strike. Shocked, Rude couldn't believe had defeated such a tough enemy with just one hit. Alicia was just as amazed, saying it was incredible how Rude had powered up his sword with mana without any practice. Rude said he thought this was the right time to try since his mana was leaking out anyway, so it made sense to test it now. But just as he finished, his sword suddenly broke into pieces, leaving both of them wide-eyed in disbelief. Rude let out a frustrated yell as his sword broke apart, but after a few breaths, he calmed down. He told Alicia that Head used the sword a lot, so it was only a matter of time before it snapped, and there wasn't much he could do about it. Alicia said the sword probably couldn't handle all the mana he had forced into it. She added that since a weapon is like an adventurer's own body, it made sense that Rude felt upset seeing it break. Changing the topic, Rude said they should call it a day and mentioned Head take some of the monster's remains with him to eat later. Meanwhile, in the 7th layer of the miasma labyrinth, Rude's old bullies, now adventurers, were fighting monsters nearby. After a tough battle, they defeated the stronger miasma rats and the big ones that wandered the labyrinth. One of them said the fight had been hard, but their teamwork was enough to win. The others nodded and laughed, celebrating their success. Suddenly, they heard a noise from close by. One of them decided to check it out and told the others Head heard something strange and was going to investigate. As the group moved toward the noise, one adventurer said it was strange to find stairs inside the labyrinth. Another got excited, thinking it might be a secret path leading somewhere special. They kept going and soon found a treasure chest. All three were thrilled to see it. After checking to make sure it wasn't a trap, they guessed what could be inside. When they opened it, they found a black sword that looked powerful and dangerous. One of them grabbed the sword and said he could feel magic coming from it. Another asked nervously if the sword might be cursed. Before the question could go any further, a third adventurer told him to stop being so negative. He said they hadn't seen Rude for a long time and had been struggling to make money. Finding the chest felt like a gift from the gods, a reward for their hard work. The others agreed and got even more excited. While celebrating, one mentioned hearing that Rude had been hanging out with a very beautiful elf woman lately. The others laughed and said Rude had gotten too full of himself. They agreed that next time they saw him, they'd put him back in his place. While the three adventurers talked, the black sword suddenly whispered the word kill over and over. Meanwhile, in the busy frontier city of Bologna, Rude and Alicia strolled through the crowded streets. Rude told Alicia he was thinking of asking a weapon shop owner he knew about making him a new sword. A short while later, they reached Miner's Hammer, a weapon shop run by an old man named Doem. Doem was carefully examining Rude's broken sword and said he didn't expect it to break so badly, especially a sword he had made himself. He added that pure strength alone shouldn't have shattered it so completely. Doem then asked Rude what kind of power he had put into the sword. Hearing this, Alicia asked if Rude would tell Doem everything, and Rude said he would. He trusted Doem since they had known each other a long time, and he wasn't the type to spill secrets. After Rude explained how he gained powers by eating monsters, Doem nodded and said it made sense why Rude's strength had grown so much. Alicia was surprised that Doem didn't seem shocked at all, but he told her it didn't matter what Rude ate as long as the monster meat tasted good to him. Then Doem asked if Rude wanted a sword that could handle attacks powered by mana. Rude agreed, and Doem said it would take some time, including research, to make such a sword. When Doem asked for help, Rude wondered if there was anything else he could do. Doem said having some good magic stones would really help. Rude smiled and pulled out several high-quality magic stones from his pocket. Doem's eyes widened in surprise when he saw stones from a general lizard, a Baphomet, and even a minotaur, all top grade. He told Rude that it looked like his skills had gotten a lot better since they last met. Hearing this, Rude felt proud and smiled, saying it meant a lot coming from Doem. Doem then told Rude to let him know if he needed anything else. Before they parted, Doem handed Rude a different sword and told him to use it for now. Rude was thankful and accepted the sword, but Doem gave a serious warning. Rude must never put magic into this sword. If he broke this one too, Doem said he'd have to charge him for repairs next time. Both Rude and Alicia looked worried after hearing that. Later, they sat in a restaurant eating, and Alicia suggested they avoid magic attacks for a while. Rude nodded, remembering Doem's warning, and said Doem was seriously scary when it came to weapons. Alicia smiled and said that even though things had been intense, she was happy to finally meet one of Rude's friends. Feeling a bit shy, Rude apologized for being a loner and not having many people around him. Just then, the bullies who used to pick on Rude showed up from behind and interrupted their talk. One of them said it looked like Rude and Alicia were having a good time, so they decided to join in. Alicia looked at the three strangers, wondering who they were, while Rude's face darkened as he recognized them. Alicia stood up and asked if the three had a problem with her and Rude, then suggested they settle it the adventure way, with a drinking contest. As she talked, one bully named Rondo suddenly fell forward onto the table. His friend Magnus asked if he had been drinking alone since he looked unsteady. But then Magnus noticed Rondo was clutching the sword they had found in the labyrinth. Confused, Magnus asked why Rondo still had the sword, thinking they had already sold it. As Magnus spoke, Rondo started mumbling the same word over and over. Suddenly, Rondo snapped, yelled, "Kill!" and swung the sword at Magnus, seriously hurting him. Right after hitting Magnus, Rondo swung his sword toward Alicia. Just before the strike landed, Rude jumped in and blocked the attack, saying this wasn't something a drinking contest could fix. Confused by Rondo's strange behavior, Rude wondered what was going on with him and the others. Another adventurer angrily stepped forward, yelling at Rondo to leave the party immediately. But Rondo was too strong. He pushed them back and started slashing at them too. Before Alicia could attack, she quickly apologized to the shop owner for the chaos about to unfold. She then cast a spell, blasting Rondo into a wall and breaking part of the restaurant. To everyone's shock, Rondo got up like it was nothing and came straight at her again. Rude was stunned that Rondo wasn't down after Alicia's powerful hit. He asked if she had held back, but she said any normal adventurer would have been knocked out cold. Just then, Rondo lost control again, yelling as he charged toward Rude and Alicia, promising to destroy them both. Rude got ready for the fight and warned Alicia that things were getting worse. Alicia quickly told someone nearby to help the injured if they could use healing magic. While Rude fought, Alicia warned him that Rondo's sword was cursed. Rude noticed Rondo drawing power from the sword, getting stronger by the second. Rondo swung a powerful blow at Rude, who barely managed to block it. He quickly noticed that every hit from Rondo was heavy and full of force. During their fight, Rude struck Rondo's legs, but to his shock, red, tentacle-like tendrils wrapped around Rondo's body, healing the wound fast. Watching closely, Alicia worried that if she used her magic to help, the cursed sword might absorb it. She realized she had to wait for the right moment to strike a strong, finishing blow. While Alicia was thinking, one of Rondo's friends, Rigard, yelled at Rude and Alicia, begging them not to kill Rondo. Rigard said he knew Rondo had hurt Rude before, but Rondo and Magnus were the only people who made him feel less alone. Tears fell as Rigard pleaded for Rondo's life to be spared. Hearing this, Rude promised he'd try to stop Rondo without killing him. Turning to Alicia, he said he would use his substitute skill and asked her to trust him for a bit. She agreed. As the fight went on, Rude remembered that using substitute on Alicia lasted about 10 seconds. Now, his challenge was to keep Rondo calm while finding a way to break the curse controlling him. Just as Rude was thinking hard, Rondo struck him with a strong blow. Alicia shouted in worry, seeing how hard Rude was hit. Even though the hit was powerful, Rude blocked it but noticed how heavy Rondo's attacks were. He quickly figured out that if he could hold back Rondo's sword, he could use his substitute skill on him. Acting fast, Rude cast principles of earth magic, trapping Rondo in place. He thought if the problem was the curse, he could fix it like he did for Alicia. So, Rude tried to use substitute on Rondo, hoping to bring him back to normal. For a moment, Rondo came to his senses and begged Rude to save him. But before Rude could do anything else, he was knocked backward. Alicia asked if he was all right, and Rude said he was okay, but added that the substitute skill didn't work on Rondo. He guessed it wasn't Rondo fighting the skill, but the sword's power stopping it. Rude decided to try weakening the sword's magic and fired principles of fire magic at Rondo. Just then, Rondo broke free from the magic trap and blocked the fire attack. Right then, Rude realized he had only managed to break the curse on Rondo's right arm. He figured that if that was true, he'd have to strike from outside the reach of that arm. But during the fight, Rondo suddenly moved fast, catching Rude off guard, and to his shock, the sword was sucking up his magic again. After pulling in a huge amount of magic, the sword completely took over Rondo's body, transforming him into something else. Rude quickly used his appraisal skill and saw that the person in front of him wasn't Rondo anymore, but a two-headed cursed monster called Graham. The creature immediately launched a fierce attack, and even though Rude tried to block, the hit was so strong it sent him flying back, causing heavy damage. Rude thought the monster was incredibly quick now, moving only when needed and striking like an expert fighter. Just as Graham was about to deliver a final, powerful blow, Alicia jumped in, stopping the attack. She struck hard and pushed the monster back, giving them space. Alicia told Rude she'd have to stand between him and the monster for a while. Rude thanked her, surprised that she could fight well up close. Alicia explained that a wizard who freezes when the enemy gets close is useless, and she didn't want to be that kind of burden. So, she learned how to fight hand-to-hand too. Alicia warned Rude that the monster controlling Rondo was no ordinary foe anymore. She said the curse had gone too far, and the only way to stop it was to destroy Rondo's heart. Rude, feeling uneasy, knew she was right and had no other choice but to agree. Meanwhile, Magnus and Rigard were still hurt. The healer told Magnus to stay down while healing him, but Magnus, even injured, asked Rigard if he had heard Alicia's warning about Rondo. He wanted to know if the only way to beat Rondo was by breaking his heart, and Rigard, worried, just nodded quietly. Back with Rude and Alicia, they kept fighting the monster, but Rude realized that even together, they couldn't find a clear chance to finish it. Rude thought maybe the monster's two heads gave it a wider view, making it harder to sneak up on. He told Alicia to step back for a bit while he tried to plan. Rude cast a spell that made the area foggy and hard to see. Alicia got the idea right away. He was trying to block the monster's sight. As the creature looked around confused, Rude snuck behind it and chopped off one of its heads. At the same time, Alicia called forth her earth spirit, Nomia, who struck hard at the monster's heart. But when the attack landed, Alicia frowned because it barely scratched the heart and didn't do much damage. Just as the monster lunged at Alicia, Rigard and Magnus suddenly jumped in front to block the attack. Rude was shocked to see them standing up against Rondo's cursed form. Rigard spoke firmly, telling Rondo that he would fight to stop him no matter what, even if it meant risking his own life. Holding his sword aimed at the monster's heart, Rigard promised that the three of them would face this battle together until the very end. Right after that, Magnus unleashed a powerful strike against the creature controlling Rondo's body. Magnus' sword found its mark, piercing straight through Rondo's heart. Slowly, Rondo's body crumbled and vanished, along with the dark magic that had taken hold of him. Watching this, Rude and Alicia felt deep sadness for Rondo and his friends, Magnus and Rigard. Tears streamed down Magnus and Rigard's faces as they mourned the loss of their fallen comrade. Amid the sorrow, Rude's eyes fell on the cursed sword lying on the ground, the very weapon that had caused all this pain. He picked it up quietly, knowing that even if he hid the sword away, it might still bring harm to someone else someday. As he thought about what to do, the sword started whispering again, repeating the chilling word kill over and over. But just then, the system window popped up, telling Rude the curse from the sword was broken and he was now protected from any strange effects. Annoyed by the sword's endless whispers, Rude told it to shut up, saying its tricks wouldn't work on him anymore. The sword seemed to hesitate, then went silent. Suddenly, the restaurant door swung open, and Lankars, the guild master from Bologna, stepped inside, his face full of concern. He asked if everyone was okay. Calmly holding the sword, Rude replied that the fight was finally over. After hearing Rude's explanation, Lankars suggested they all head back to the guild for now. Soon, they arrived at the guild hall, where Lankars asked Rude and the others to share everything that had happened in detail. As Rude told the story, Lankars understood that Rondo had used the cursed sword to boost his power. With Magnus confirming the events, Lankars felt sure the other adventurers would believe their side. Magnus, still in shock, struggled to fully grasp what had just taken place. Sensing the moment to change the mood, Lankars asked Rude how he was feeling, noticing Head held the cursed sword for quite a while. Rude explained to Lankars that thanks to his immunity to abnormal effects, curses no longer bothered him. He added that as long as he kept the sword, no one else would fall victim like Rondo did. After thinking it over, Langkars respected Rude's determination, but warned that if the sword ever controlled him, he wouldn't hesitate to take serious action. Without missing a beat, Rude promised that if it came to that, Langkars should do whatever was needed. Alicia listened quietly, looking a bit concerned, but saying nothing. Langkars then thanked both Rude and Alicia for handling the dangerous situation. Langkars continued speaking, telling Rude and Alicia that this was no time for anyone to relax. Hearing the seriousness in his tone, Alicia grew concerned and asked if something had happened to make him say such a thing. Langkars then explained that the adventurers who had accompanied him had originally been summoned to deal with another matter he was about to reveal. Recently, he said, the number of monsters appearing outside the labyrinths had been increasing at an alarming rate, and the source of the problem seemed to be the newly discovered Abellio labyrinth. According to the investigation conducted by the survey team, the sudden surge of monsters was connected to the presence of a particular creature lurking deep within a labyrinth. Upon hearing this, Rude's curiosity was immediately stirred, and he could not help but wonder what kind of mysterious monster could be responsible for such a phenomenon. Langkars informed them that the monster in question was known as the miasma dragon, also called Basilista. He admitted that most of his knowledge about the creature came from old records and books, but according to those sources, its estimated level exceeded 70. Upon hearing this, Rude and Alicia were left stunned, immediately realizing that the dragon's strength far surpassed their own. Langkars went on to explain that while the dragon's combat abilities alone were already extremely dangerous, the true threat lay in its ability to release large amounts of miasma. This dense miasma was believed to stimulate nearby monsters, agitating them and driving them out of the dungeon in far greater numbers than usual. Because of this, the situation had rapidly grown more serious, and during their investigation, the survey team had already suffered several casualties. Langkars added that those who had returned from the survey were currently receiving treatment, but he warned that if the situation continued unchecked, the problem would not remain confined to the monsters within the labyrinth, as the miasma would eventually seep outside and cause catastrophic damage to the surrounding areas. He then explained that this was precisely why he had been searching for Rude and Alicia. After hearing the full explanation and understanding the seriousness of the situation, Rude told Langkars that he now grasped what was happening and suggested that they first visit the surviving members of the survey team. Shortly afterward, they arrived at the Adventurers Guild medical ward, where the injured adventurers were being treated. There, Rude approached one of the adventurers who had been heavily afflicted by the miasma and was writhing in pain on the bed. Raising his hand, Rude gently placed it on the adventurer's body, and as he activated his skill, Substitute, he slowly began drawing the miasma out of the adventurer's body, steadily easing their suffering. Langkars watched in astonishment, as he had never witnessed such an unusual healing method before. Unable to hide his surprise, he told Rude that he had no idea Rude possessed the ability to nullify abnormal conditions affecting others. Rude calmly explained that the ability only worked if the person he was helping did not reject his assistance. After clarifying this, Rude turned to Langkars and stated that this was exactly why only he and Alicia would participate in the subjugation of the dragon. One of the nearby adventurers overheard the conversation and, shocked by Rude's declaration, immediately called him foolish for suggesting that the two of them alone could face such a terrifying opponent. Langkars, however, remained serious. Looking directly at Rude, he asked him plainly what he believed his chances of success were. Hearing Langkars' question, Rude explained that the fewer people he had to protect within the miasma-filled environment, the easier it would be for him to move and fight freely. With a confident smile, he added that battling powerful monsters on his own was something he had always wanted to experience. After carefully considering Rude's reasoning, Langkars placed a firm hand on his shoulder and acknowledged his resolve, ultimately agreeing to the proposal and entrusting the subjugation of the miasma dragon, Basilista, to him. A short while later, the meeting came to an end, and Rude and Alicia were walking through the city streets together. As they made their way along the road, Rude turned to Alicia and suggested that they get a proper night's sleep and make sure they were fully prepared for the challenge that awaited them. Alicia asked Rude whether it was truly all right for just the two of them to take on such a dangerous mission. In response, Rude explained that he could only use his abilities without hesitation if there were no other people around for him to worry about protecting. Then, his tone softening, he apologized for dragging her into such a perilous situation. However, Alicia simply smiled and dismissed his concern, telling him that if he had even thought about taking on the mission without her, she would have given him a beating for trying to leave her behind. She reminded him that they were a team and reassured him that together they were more than capable of saving everyone. Hearing her unwavering confidence, Rude nodded in agreement, accepting her words with a quiet sense of reassurance. The next day, deep within the lower floors of the Yahello labyrinth, Rude and Alicia were engaged in battle against a group of mob monsters known as bobgoblins. After a brief but intense fight, they swiftly defeated the goblins surrounding them. Once the area had fallen quiet, Rude turned to Alicia and remarked that the situation was more or less exactly as the rankers had described, though they still needed to push through at least 5 more floors before reaching their destination. He added that while he had not heard any reports of the miasma spreading this far down, it was obvious that something was wrong. Alicia, carefully observing their surroundings, pointed out that the spread of the miasma appeared to be accelerating. She explained that even the purification items she carried were gradually losing their effectiveness, making it increasingly difficult to cleanse the thickening miasma around them. Changing the subject slightly, Rude then commented that many of the monsters on the next floor seemed to no longer be alive, hinting at the grim and unusual situation that awaited them ahead. Rude then told Alicia that he was not sure how many more floors they would need to pass through and asked if she was certain she did not want to back out while she still could, wanting to confirm whether she truly wished to continue. Alicia, however, firmly replied that she wanted to take on the mission with him. She admitted that Rude's abilities might not be as effective against the monster they were heading to face, but even if close combat became unavoidable, she was confident that she could still land some solid blows. Alicia added that running away and leaving her friends behind again was something she could never forgive herself for. Hearing those words, Rude felt a twinge of guilt and apologized for placing her in such a situation once more. Wanting to support her, he gently placed his hand on her shoulder and activated his substitute skill to relieve the miasma afflicting her body. As Rude observed the miasma surrounding Alicia, he eventually released his hand and remarked that, just as he had expected, he could remove the miasma while maintaining physical contact with her. But once he let go, it slowly began to accumulate in her body again. Alicia smiled when she heard this and suggested that they simply hold hands as they continued forward. She then took Rude's hand in hers and explained that the thick miasma made it difficult for her to clearly see where she was stepping. In addition to Rude using his substitute skill to help suppress the miasma, she asked him to escort her through the labyrinth since her visibility was so limited. Rude smiled in response and agreed to her request, assuring her that he would guide her. With that, the two of them continued their exploration of the labyrinth while holding hands. Moments later, the two of them reached the middle floors of the Yahello labyrinth, where Rude pointed out that the deeper they went, the thicker the miasma became. He also mentioned that he had activated his echolocation skill and had detected 2 monsters waiting ahead of them. Alicia observed that if those creatures were capable of surviving in such a dense concentration of miasma, they must be extremely formidable opponents. Rude agreed with her assessment, noting that the monsters did not resemble any he had encountered before, which likely meant her assumption was correct. Alicia then asked whether there were any possible detours they could take to avoid them. Rude confirmed that there was an alternate path, but added that, if possible, he would prefer to confront the 2 monsters directly. Surprised by his answer, Alicia teasingly asked if he intended to eat the monsters. Rude quickly denied this, explaining that such a thing was not his intention. Instead, he clarified that before facing the dragon, he wanted to test the cursed sword Graham, which he had recently acquired. With that said, Rude stepped forward toward the monsters, which were soon identified as level 33 rolling beetles. Activating his principles of earth magic beneath them, he caused the ground to violently shift, launching both monsters into the air. However, as Rude and Alicia watched the outcome, they realized that the spell had not been as effective as they had hoped. One of the rolling beetles immediately curled its body into a ball and shot toward them at high speed. Both Rude and Alicia were momentarily caught off guard by the monster's sudden counterattack. Reacting quickly, Rude turned to Alicia and asked if she could stop the monster's assault. Without hesitation, Alicia told him to leave everything to her, adding that she would need to release his hand for a moment in order to cast her spell. In that moment, Alicia summoned her spirit fairy, Nomia, who immediately activated a spell to intercept the rolling beetle that was charging toward them. However, the monster proved far stronger than expected, and, as she struggled to restrain it, Alicia apologized to Rude, realizing that she would not be able to hold it back for much longer. Understanding the urgency of the situation, Rude quickly unsheathed his cursed sword, telling Alicia that he would use this opportunity to test his new weapon. Gathering all of his magical energy into the blade, he focused intensely while silently hoping that this sword would not shatter like the previous one had. Once enough energy had been concentrated, Rude swung the blade in a powerful strike at the approaching monster. The attack connected and caused some damage, but it failed to cut deeply enough to deal serious harm, leaving the creature only slightly wounded. Realizing that his previous strike lacked sufficient power, Rude understood that he would have to take a gamble. He called out to Alicia, and the moment she heard him, she immediately grasped what he intended. Without hesitation, Alicia unleashed a powerful surge of magical energy, which was instantly absorbed by the cursed sword Graham, one of the weapon's unique abilities. Seeing this, Rude smiled and called out to Graham, urging the sword to reveal its true power. With that, he unleashed a devastating slash toward the rolling beetle, the strike so overwhelming that it split the monster cleanly in half with a single blow. After watching the first creature collapse, Rude shifted his attention to the second beetle, and moments later, he swiftly finished that one off as well. After defeating the monsters, Rude approached Alicia with an excited expression and praised her, saying that her control over her magic had been flawless. Alicia, just as excited, replied that things had turned out quite well. Rude then immediately took her hand and activated his substitute skill, drawing the miasma out of her body once again. Grateful, Alicia thanked him for helping her. After the miasma had been completely absorbed, Rude changed the subject and asked if they could spare a little more time before continuing. Confused, Alicia asked why he needed the extra time. Rude explained that even though the sword had absorbed the magical energy earlier, it had not actually restored his own mana. Hearing this, Alicia quickly understood and teasingly asked if he was planning to eat the monster after all. Embarrassed by her guess, Rude hurriedly denied it, explaining that he only intended to cut the monster into small pieces and carry them along for their journey. A few moments later, Rude used his fire spell to cook the monster meat, and after tasting it, he commented that the flavor was quite unique. Alicia then asked how it felt for him to use the cursed sword. Rude explained that once the sword absorbed enough energy, his physical abilities had increased significantly. Alicia observed that the weapon also seemed sturdy enough that it would not break even if Rude poured a large amount of mana into it, and Rude agreed with her assessment. However, he then mentioned that something about the situation still bothered him. According to the eyewitness reports, the miasma dragon was as large as a massive tree, which made him question how effective the sword would truly be against such a gigantic opponent. He also added that, when it came to the sheer weight and impact of an attack, his previous sword had actually been far superior to the one he was currently using. As Rude was speaking with Alicia, he suddenly heard a voice in his mind. It was the voice of the sword. The sword told him to give it the mana stone so it could feast. Confused, Rude briefly wondered if the sword was referring to the monster meat. The sword quickly denied this and clarified that it had no interest in the meat, but rather in the magic stone contained within the monster's body. Understanding this, Rude retrieved the mana stone from the defeated monster and handed it to the sword. The moment the blade absorbed the stone, it began to power up, and within seconds the once small and lightweight weapon transformed into a massive blade. Rude was visibly impressed by the sword's newfound power and change in form. Meanwhile, Alicia looked confused and asked how Rude had understood what the sword was saying, since she had not heard anything at all. Rude explained that the sword had spoken directly into his mind. Thinking about it for a moment, he wondered if the cursed sword had become annoyed earlier when he compared it to his previous weapons, which might explain why it had suddenly grown larger to prove its worth. Turning to Alicia, Rude told her that he had finally figured out how to properly use the cursed sword. Alicia then informed him that the floor directly below them was where the miasma dragon had last been sighted. Just as she finished speaking, a thunderous roar echoed up from the depths of the labyrinth below, causing both Rude and Alicia to freeze in surprise at the sudden sound. Rude then asked Alicia whether the roar they had heard had come from the miasma dragon, but as he spoke, he suddenly noticed that the ceiling above them was beginning to collapse. Realizing the danger, he immediately warned Alicia and suggested that they reinforce the ceiling with earth magic. However, Alicia quickly pointed out that if they focused on protecting themselves, the staircase would likely be blocked by the debris, causing them to lose their only chance to confront the miasma dragon. Without hesitating, she activated her wind magic and told Rude that instead of defending, they would break through before the ceiling could collapse. Grabbing hold of Rude, she propelled the two of them upward with a powerful burst of wind, and together they blasted through the ceiling, escaping into the floor above just moments before the entire room caved in behind them. Once they landed safely, Rude and Alicia exchanged relieved smiles, and Rude admitted that for a moment he had thought he was going to die. Alicia replied that the maneuver had cost her quite a bit of magical power. As they began surveying the new floor, Rude noticed how dark the area was and suggested that they move slowly while using his thermal search skill so they could detect threats and remain relatively safe while searching for enemies. However, as he spoke, he suddenly sensed something approaching them. Immediately activating his thermal sense, Rude informed Alicia that something was coming from the other side. As the presence drew closer, he confirmed that it was the miasma dragon, Basilista. The moment the massive creature appeared before them, both Rude and Alicia were taken aback by its overwhelming presence. When Rude checked its status, he was shocked to discover that the dragon was level 75. Rude explained that although the dragon was not particularly agile, its vitality exceeded 500, making it an extremely dangerous opponent. Hearing this, Alicia immediately asked about the creature's abilities, and Rude replied that both its fangs and claws carried a deadly poison. But before he could reveal anything further, the dragon suddenly released a thunderous roar that echoed through the cavern, instantly alerting them to the fact that it had already sensed their presence, prompting Rude to warn Alicia that the monster had noticed them. Remaining calm, Alicia quickly asked whether the dragon possessed any magical resistances, and Rude answered that it was resistant to fire, earth, lightning, and darkness, information that helped Alicia instantly decide to rely on other elemental attributes. With preparations complete, Rude shifted into his combat stance and told Alicia it was time to begin the battle. Yet, as the clash started, he secretly planned to keep his distance and observe the dragon carefully until he could understand its attack patterns, though a growing concern lingered in his mind because the dense miasma surrounding them would gradually weaken Alicia if the fight dragged on too long. And while he wished he could finish the battle quickly, it was obvious that the dragon's overwhelming strength would not make that easy. Suddenly, the beast opened its jaws and unleashed a devastating stream of fire toward him, forcing Rude to instantly activate Flash Step and barely evade the scorching blast, while Alicia watched in shock as the ground struck by the flames completely melted away as if it had never existed. And as Rude continued weaving through the dragon's relentless attacks, Alicia called forth her wind spirit and cast a supportive spell that wrapped around him like a gust of living wind, greatly enhancing his speed and allowing him to move far faster than before. With his speed greatly enhanced, Rude dashed forward and closed the distance with the dragon in an instant, swinging his sword with all his strength and managing to land a clean strike against the monster's body. However, the blade barely bit into the dragon's thick scales, leaving only a shallow mark, and Rude immediately realized that breaking through its defenses would not be easy, thinking grimly that the creature's hide was far tougher than he had anticipated and that his magic also seemed poorly suited to fighting it. Realizing brute force alone would not work, he called out to Alicia, who quickly responded by directing her spirit magic toward the dragon. But when the spell struck its massive body, the effect was disappointingly small, and Alicia stared in shock as she realized that even her magic would barely harm such a monster, making it clear that their attacks were far from enough to turn the tide of the battle. While both of them were momentarily stunned by the dragon's overwhelming durability, the creature suddenly retaliated, whipping its massive tail through the air, the movement sending countless needle-like spikes flying toward them at terrifying speed. Reacting instantly, Rude reinforced his body while Alicia raised a magical shield, the two of them barely managing to deflect the deadly barrage as the sharp needles clattered against their defenses. As Rude continued focusing on the fight, a grim realization settled in his mind. They were in serious trouble, as the dragon possessed incredible defensive power while also having dangerous long-range attacks, leaving him wondering how they could possibly bring such a monster down. Suddenly, Alicia shouted to him, telling him to buy her some time while she prepared her special move before the miasma began lowering her stats even further. Without hesitation, Rude acknowledged her request and shifted his attention entirely toward holding the dragon back, doing everything he could to create the time she needed while Alicia began gathering her magic. As she concentrated on charging the spell, Alicia could not ignore the uneasy thought that she had left herself completely vulnerable, placing all her trust in Rude to keep the dragon at bay and protect them both until her attack was ready. At that moment, Alicia realized that while she prepared her spell, Rude had been forced to handle most of the defense alone, and she felt she had to make up for that while she remained vulnerable. Determined to make the chance count, she decided to pour all of her remaining magic into a single powerful attack. Calling forth all of her spirits, Salam, Urdial, Nomia, and Wakin, she gathered their strength and focused it into the spell she was preparing. The dragon sensed the overwhelming power forming around her and quickly recognized the threat, immediately shifting its attention toward Alicia. Without hesitation, it cast the spell Principles of Darkness, sending a powerful wave of dark magic toward her. At that moment, Rude stepped forward and intercepted the attack, absorbing the dragon's magic energy before it could reach Alicia. Seeing him directly in the path of the attack, Alicia shouted for him to move out of the way. As Rude shifted aside, Alicia released her spell, Spirit's Quintet, and the attack flew forward and struck the dragon with full force. When the smoke from the impact cleared, Alicia saw that the dragon was still standing, though it was badly wounded. She admitted that in the past, she would have been able to defeat such a creature with a single spell, but now she was still too weak since she had not fully recovered her strength. At that moment, Rude walked up and placed his hands on Alicia's shoulders, using his substitute skill to absorb the miasma from her body. He told her it had been a great shot and reassured her that she had done well, adding that now it was his turn to face the dragon. The dragon, bloodied and battered, glared at them while Alicia apologized to Rude for making him use substitute on her, explaining that she had spent nearly all of her magic power on that last attack. Rude reassured Alicia that everything was fine and told her to focus on using the last of her magic to protect herself. He calmly added that from this point on, she could leave the rest of the fight to him. Still worried, Alicia urged Rude to be careful. Just then, the dragon released a thunderous roar that echoed through the area, but Rude immediately answered by activating his own roar skill. Mimicking the dragon's roar with startling accuracy, he caught the creature off guard with the unexpected response. The sudden counter left the dragon momentarily surprised, creating an opening. Without wasting the chance, Rude rushed straight toward the dragon. As he charged forward, he began to notice something unusual within his body. The dark magic he had absorbed earlier seemed to have flooded him with an enormous amount of mana. In that moment, Rude could clearly feel his magic power surging and overflowing inside him. In that moment, Rude swung his sword with full force and landed a heavy slash on the dragon's arm, noticing that one of its scales had cracked and begun to fall away from the impact. The sight filled him with excitement, as it meant the creature's defenses were not completely impenetrable and that cutting through them would now be easier. Encouraged by this discovery, he continued pressing the attack, delivering a series of stronger and more aggressive strikes as the battle continued. However, before long he began to realize that his sword, Graham, was losing some of its effectiveness as the mana it had previously absorbed slowly faded away. Sensing that his attacks were weakening, the dragon suddenly released a thunderous roar before activating its skill, Miasma Wave, sending a massive surge of miasma directly toward Rude. The attack slammed into him with tremendous force and blasted him backward through the air. Although the poisonous effects of the miasma had no effect on him, Rude still felt the full physical impact of the attack, making him realize that while he could resist the miasma itself, he was still vulnerable to the sheer power behind it. As he was processing this realization, the dragon swung its tail violently, firing a storm of needle-like projectiles straight toward him. Seeing that he could not dodge the barrage normally, Rude quickly activated his skill flash step to escape. However, just as he attempted to reposition himself, the dragon had already predicted where he would appear and moved to intercept him. Appearing directly in front of him, the dragon struck Rude with a powerful blow. Rude immediately activated his skill steel body to reinforce himself, but the defense was still not enough to fully withstand the attack, and the impact sent him flying backward once again. As he regained his footing, Rude realized that the dragon had accurately calculated the range of his flash step and used that knowledge against him, leaving him momentarily impressed by the monster's frightening level of intelligence and adaptability. The dragon slowly advanced toward Rude, its massive body drawing closer with every step. At the same time, Alicia called out to him in alarm and began running toward him as quickly as she could. Meanwhile, Rude remained on the ground, and his mind briefly drifted back to a past battle when he had nearly lost his life while fighting a minotaur. As the memory surfaced, his expression changed. He reminded himself that he was no longer the same person he had been back then. Realizing how much he had grown since that day filled him with renewed resolve. With that determination, Rude activated his skill, Principles of Earth Magic, launching himself upward just as the dragon moved into strike. As Rude rose into the air, the dragon noticed his movement and immediately unleashed a blast of fire breath in an attempt to finish him off. Watching the attack rush toward him, Rude briefly considered using his thread manipulation skill to avoid it. However, he quickly understood that simply evading would only lead to a battle of attrition that he could not win. Deciding he needed to take the risk, he chose to turn the situation to his advantage. Forming a plan, Rude resolved to use his threads like a slingshot to propel himself directly toward the dragon and create the perfect chance to attack. In an instant, he activated his thread manipulation and launched himself forward at full speed straight toward the dragon. Even as the dragon's fire breath surged toward him, Rude did not attempt to dodge. Instead, he charged directly through the attack. In that critical moment, he swung his sword with all his strength, cutting through the flames as he closed the distance with his opponent. As Rude pushed through the dragon's fiery breath, he realized that although he could not completely block the intense heat, he was still able to absorb the mana contained within the flames. In that moment, he understood that if his fire resistance allowed him to endure the burning heat long enough, he could channel his own mana into his sword and combine it with the power Graham had already absorbed, releasing everything in a single decisive strike against the dragon. With that plan in mind, Rude gathered every bit of his strength and focused all of his energy into the attack he was preparing. At that crucial moment, Alicia moved to support him. Activating her water skill, she directed it toward Rude, using it to reduce the overwhelming heat of the dragon's flames. Noticing her assistance, Rude gave a faint smile and silently thanked her for acting so quickly. Encouraged by her support, his determination only grew stronger. Pouring the last of his power into the swing, Rude forced his way through the dragon's blazing attack. With a tremendous surge of strength, he shattered the fire breath and delivered a final decisive strike, cleaving the dragon's body cleanly in two. As the dragon's enormous body crashed to the ground, Alicia quickly rushed over to Rude, insisting that she would cast healing magic on him immediately. Just as she was about to begin, however, Rude stopped her and gently told her that she didn't need to push herself any further after everything she had already done. At that moment, Rude activated his skill blood-sucking, and the dragon's blood slowly began flowing from its corpse, being drawn into his body. Alicia stared in shock and confusion at the strange sight unfolding before her. Noticing her reaction, Rude calmly explained that blood-sucking was a skill he had obtained from the labyrinth, one that allowed him to recover some of his strength by absorbing energy from blood. After a short while, he had absorbed enough to recover from his serious injuries, though his condition was still far from fully restored. Letting out a tired sigh, Rude lay down on the ground and suggested to Alicia that they should take a brief rest. He then smiled at her and held out his hand. Seeing the gesture, Alicia returned the smile and reached out to take it. In that moment, Rude activated his skill substitute, drawing out the remaining miasma from her body and absorbing it himself. Both of them remained lying on the ground, clearly exhausted from the battle. Turning his head toward her, Rude remarked that they had managed to defeat the dragon, and Alicia nodded in agreement, saying that they truly had. However, she added that this was only the beginning of their journey. Hearing that, Rude smiled and admitted that she was right. As they rested there, Rude's thoughts drifted back to the past. He remembered the day he had once been saved by an S-class adventurer, a moment that had left a deep impression on him. Thinking about that person again, Rude realized just how powerful that adventurer had been compared to him. The memory reminded him that he still had a long way to go before he could reach the same level as the one who had inspired him to become an adventurer in the first place. Rude sat up beside Alicia and suggested that their first priority should be to gather some of the miasma dragon's meat. Alicia agreed with a nod and encouraged him to begin collecting it right away. Sometime later, while continuing to move through the labyrinth, the two eventually came across a large and unfamiliar chamber. As they stepped inside, they quickly realized that they had reached the core of the labyrinth. Alicia gazed at the sight in awe, commenting that only a handful of adventurers had ever been fortunate enough to witness something like it. She then pointed toward the magic circle located near the core and explained that if they activated it, it would transport them directly to the entrance of the labyrinth, allowing them to return to the surface immediately. Alicia further explained that because labyrinths contained rare materials that could not be found outside, it was customary for adventurers to leave the core untouched even after conquering them. However, Rude responded by pointing out that if the labyrinth remained intact, the miasma dragon would eventually revive. Thinking back on his past, Rude recalled the difficult experiences he had endured in the Yahello labyrinth. It was through those trials that he had discovered a path toward his dream. With that thought, he drew his sword and expressed his gratitude to the Yahello labyrinth for the lessons it had given him. With firm resolve, he thrust his blade into the labyrinth's core, bringing its existence to an end. Meanwhile, at the Adventurers Guild, Langkars asked one of his subordinates if there had been any updates regarding Rude and his party who had entered the labyrinth. The subordinate replied with regret that there was still no news about their situation. After hearing the report, Lankars quietly reflected that he was already aware of Rude's nickname, the Miasma Scavenger. In the world of adventurers, strength meant everything. And even if he had tried harder to mediate the situation, it likely wouldn't have changed how things had unfolded. He thought to himself that life without power was especially cruel for adventurers. If those hardships were enough to make Rude abandon his dream, then it would simply mean he had chosen a different path in life. While Lankars was still lost in these thoughts, one of his subordinates suddenly burst through the door. The man looked both panicked and excited, his expression mixed with urgency and a wide smile. He hurriedly reported that Rude and Alicia had returned after using the teleportation circle inside the labyrinth. The man also announced that the two of them had successfully defeated the Miasma Dragon and destroyed the dungeon core, effectively conquering the entire dungeon. As soon as the news spread, the guild erupted into cheers and excitement. Lankars, still stunned, thought to himself that he could hardly believe those two had actually managed to conquer the labyrinth. He also admitted that he had never imagined Rude, of all people, would end up being the one to save the city. One of the nearby adventurers then suggested that they should go and welcome Rude and Alicia properly. Not long after, the two finally arrived at the Adventurers Guild, where they were greeted enthusiastically and welcomed with open arms. Meanwhile, in the city of Golar near Bologna, the local lord reacted with fury when he learned that the Yahello labyrinth had been conquered. What angered him even more was the fact that Bologna already possessed several labyrinths and had now successfully cleared yet another one. After hearing the news, the Lord of Golar turned to one of his subordinates and stated that their plan to take control of the new labyrinth had been completely ruined. However, the subordinate calmly responded that the situation could actually work in their favor. He explained that Bologna could not deny Golar's legitimate claim to the newly discovered labyrinth, and because of that, its destruction was preferable to letting Bologna gain control over it. The subordinate continued by suggesting that if they presented the matter carefully, Golar could use the situation to challenge Bologna and demand compensation for the profits they would have gained from the labyrinth. After thinking it over, the Lord of Golar slowly nodded, agreeing that this strategy would likely prove far more profitable than attempting to claim the labyrinth by force and risking the lives of their adventurers. He also remarked that if matters unfolded that way, Bologna's Adventurers Guild would certainly not remain silent. The subordinate responded with a faint, unsettling smile and said that this reaction was exactly what they were hoping for. He then added that they would soon show Lankars and his people just how superior they truly were. Meanwhile, sometime later, Rude and Alicia were sitting in a quiet forest beside a small fire, preparing to cook the Miasma Dragon's meat they had collected. As Rude carefully grilled the meat, Alicia watched with sparkling eyes and a bit of drool forming as she commented on how incredibly delicious the aroma was. Rude laughed softly and explained that he had kept the meat stored safely in his magic bag until now and had been looking forward to finally tasting it. After a short while, the steak finished cooking, and Rude happily took a large bite, enjoying the rich flavor. Alicia continued staring at the food with wide, eager eyes, still drooling slightly as she admired the appetizing meal before them. Rude, filled with excitement, thought to himself that this must be the true taste of dragon meat. He commented that compared to this, every other meat he had eaten before now seemed dull and ordinary. The dragon's meat carried a rich sweetness, and the fat melted smoothly in his mouth. Combined with the deep flavor of the red meat, it created an incredibly satisfying taste. Meanwhile, Alicia listened to Rude's praise with growing irritation, unable to hide her envy as she wished she could enjoy the meal herself but was forced to simply watch. Growing frustrated, Alicia suddenly stood up and declared that she had made a decision. She boldly announced that that night they would be eating premium steak. Rude looked at her in confusion and replied that he was already eating a steak right now. Hearing that response only made Alicia angrier, and she snapped at him, saying it was unfair for him to say something like that while he was happily eating and she was stuck there drooling without being able to taste anything. Determined to fix the situation, Alicia insisted that they needed to hurry and gather information about the best restaurants nearby. She also urged Rude to finish his food quickly because she could no longer wait any longer. 4 days had passed since the collapse of the Yahello labyrinth, and inside the Adventurers Guild, Lankars was now speaking with Rude and Alicia. He apologized for calling them to the guild so many times recently, but assured them that this would be the final time. Lankars then explained that the official raid report had finally been confirmed. He handed them a bag filled with money, telling them it was their reward for conquering the dungeon. Inside the bag was 1.5 million Regan. Alicia accepted the reward calmly, but Rude was visibly surprised by the large amount. Lankars explained that the estimated level of the Yahello labyrinth was around 70, so the reward they received was completely justified. Hearing that made Rude even more excited. As Rude was still reacting to the reward, Lankars called out to him and pointed out that since Rude and Alicia had managed to conquer the labyrinth by themselves, there was no way Rude could remain at D rank. Lankars then informed him that he would be updating Rude's rank. After the meeting ended, Rude turned to Alicia and mentioned that although he had only recently been promoted to D rank, he had just checked his status and discovered that his level had already reached 52. He commented in surprise at how quickly he had managed to reach such a level. Alicia, noticing this, remarked that while it was true Rude had been fighting monsters far above his level, the speed of his growth was still unusually fast. She thought to herself that normally when someone reached around level 40, their progress slowed down considerably. Yet in Rude's case, there was no sign of that happening at all. Instead, his leveling speed continued at an abnormal pace. Rude then smirked at Alicia and proudly told her that he had finally surpassed her level. Curious, they compared their statuses, and Alicia was shocked to confirm that Rude had indeed overtaken her. Slightly annoyed, she told him that it wasn't fun for her to be surpassed like that. Rude, however, pointed out that even though his level was now higher than hers, Alicia was still stronger than him when it came to actual combat ability. Hearing that, Alicia brightened a little and agreed, explaining that levels were only an indicator, while true combat strength depended far more on a person's skills and experience. Just as Alicia was saying this, the Lord of Golar territory entered the Adventurers Guild along with several of his subordinates. The Lord stepped forward and looked at Rude before remarking that he had heard about him, the one known as the Miasma Scavenger. Rude responded by asking who the man was, adding bluntly that he seemed rather rude. Hearing this, the Lord laughed and asked if the adventurers of Bellona truly didn't recognize the faces of the lords from neighboring territories. Realizing this, Rude quickly understood that the man standing before him was the infamous Misery Lord of Golar. The Lord then smirked and remarked that it had been quite bold of Rude to destroy the new labyrinth, one that should have rightfully belonged to Golar's territory. Rude responded by reminding the Lord that, as far as he knew, the Yahello labyrinth had been jointly owned and did not belong solely to Golar territory. However, the Lord quickly interrupted him, claiming that although the labyrinth stood on the border between Bellona and Golar, the people of Bellona had selfishly shut Golar out by insisting that something unusual was happening inside. The Lord of Golar continued, accusing Bellona of allowing the situation to spiral out of control, which had led to a flood of monsters and ultimately the destruction of the labyrinth. Because of that, he argued, the profits that Golar should have received from the labyrinth had been lost, and the surrounding areas had also suffered damage from the monsters that had appeared. He then demanded to know how Rude intended to compensate for those losses. Before Rude could respond, Alicia stepped forward and calmly interrupted, telling the Lord that such matters should be discussed between the appropriate guild representatives rather than with adventurers. She also pointed out that, to her knowledge, there had been no confirmed reports of monsters invading Golar's territory, and that the adventurers of Bellona had already handled the situation themselves. With a polite but sharp smile, she then asked who had given someone who had done nothing the authority to complain about it. The Lord found himself momentarily speechless at her words. Meanwhile, Rude watched the exchange and thought to himself that it was no surprise an S-class adventurer like Alicia could handle such a situation so perfectly, and he couldn't help but admire how confidently she spoke. As Alicia continued addressing the Lord, one of the men standing behind him stepped forward and spoke up, saying that he had heard the rumors but hadn't expected them to be true. He remarked that Alicia of the Emerald Storm had apparently joined Bellona. Then, with a cold tone, he added that since someone like Alicia should have been weakened by the curse of the Abyssal Labyrinth, it wasn't surprising that she had ended up in a place like Bellona. Watching the exchange, Rude immediately thought that the man speaking was a complete bastard, recognizing him as the Guild Master of Golar. The Guild Master then told Alicia that this matter was not something ordinary adventurers should involve themselves in. And as he stepped closer, he sneered at her and cruelly called her nothing more than a worthless survivor of a party that had died in vain. The man continued speaking harshly, telling Alicia to stop interfering in matters that didn't concern her, and even went so far as to call her trash. His insults caused Alicia's irritation to rise, and she quietly activated her power in response. The man immediately felt the pressure and was startled, unable to believe that someone reduced to level 45 could still intimidate him. At that moment, a voice suddenly called out, ordering Alicia to stop. The one who had spoken was Lankars. He firmly stated that he would not allow any fighting to take place inside his guild and instructed the Lord and Guild Master of Golar to accompany him to his office. As they began walking away, the Guild Master of Golar muttered under his breath that they should learn to keep their dogs on a leash, clearly referring to Alicia and Rude. Rude felt his frustration rising at the insult and was about to respond when someone suddenly approached them and called out to Alicia, asking if she remembered him. Already irritated by the earlier confrontation, Rude felt even more annoyed by yet another interruption. However, Alicia looked at the newcomer and asked if he was Ebert. Hearing his name, Ebert's eyes lit up with excitement as he took her hand and happily said he was glad she still remembered him. Curious, Rude asked Alicia if she knew the man standing before them. Alicia explained that Ebert had once been part of her old party and that they had gone on many adventures together in the past. Ebert then added enthusiastically that back then he had greatly admired the Azure Trails party that Alicia belonged to. He spoke about how her ability to control multiple spirit magics at the same time and her confident presence had always inspired him. As a fellow elf, Ebert admitted that he had always looked up to her. Ebert looked at Alicia with a sorrowful expression and told her that he knew how much she must have suffered because of the tragedy that occurred in the Abyssal Labyrinth. He explained that learning about what had happened was the reason he had come all the way to Bologna. Then, suddenly brightening, Ebert smiled and asked Alicia if she would consider joining his party. Alicia seemed confused by the sudden proposal and remained silent for a moment, while Rude stood beside her looking clearly irritated by what he had just heard. After a brief pause, Alicia thanked Ebert for the offer, but calmly explained that she had already formed a new party. She then introduced Rude to him as her current party member. Rude, still annoyed but trying to remain polite, introduced himself to Ebert and said it was nice to meet him. However, when Rude extended his hand for a handshake, Ebert casually slapped it aside and ignored him completely. The gesture instantly angered Rude, but Ebert paid him no attention and instead turned his focus back to Alicia. Taking hold of her hand, he mentioned that he had heard about the incident in the Abyssal Labyrinth and about the curse that had weakened her. Ebert then remarked that he never expected someone as capable as Alicia, once an S-rank adventurer, to end up in a situation where she had to team up with someone known as a miasma scavenger. Hearing this only made Rude's anger grow. Smiling confidently, Ebert continued speaking, suggesting that if Alicia joined his party instead, they would surely be able to make proper use of her talents and experience. Before he could continue, however, Alicia quickly pulled her hand away from him and, with a firm voice, told Ebert to stop speaking about things he clearly didn't understand. Alicia looked at Ebert with firm resolve and told him that she had chosen to form a party with Rude of her own will, and that insulting Rude was no different from insulting her. She thanked Ebert for his concern, but assured him that the curse within her body had already been removed. Hearing this, Ebert was stunned and struggled to believe her words. He reminded Alicia that the curse she had received came from the S-rank Abyssal Labyrinth, and that it had been inflicted by the floor owner itself. Alicia simply smiled and replied that she had encountered a stroke of good fortune, and with that brief explanation, she and Rude turned and walked away, leaving Ebert standing there. Still deep in thought, Ebert wondered how Alicia could have possibly freed herself from such a powerful curse. Meanwhile, as they walked away, Rude thanked Alicia for standing up for him, and she advised him to keep his abilities secret since revealing them would only bring unnecessary trouble. Continuing forward, Alicia called back to Ebert and mentioned that they were on their way to update their ranks. She added that Rude would no longer remain a D rank and would soon be promoted to C rank. Hearing this left Ebert unsettled. He had spent all this time thinking about Alicia, yet she had chosen to stand beside Rude instead. At that moment, anger began to rise within him as he convinced himself that Rude must somehow be manipulating her, because he simply could not believe that Alicia would willingly choose to follow someone like him. Ebert, lost in thought, found it hard to believe that a mere D-rank adventurer would even dare to attempt defeating something like a miasma dragon. However, he began to consider that the situation might be different if Alicia's curse had truly been lifted. In that moment, Ebert convinced himself that it must have been Alicia who defeated the miasma dragon, while Rude had simply taken the credit for her accomplishment. As this idea settled in his mind, a dangerous aura began to emanate from him as his anger steadily grew. Noticing this, Rude quietly mentioned to Alicia that Ebert had been glaring at him rather intensely. Alicia responded by explaining that elves were a very proud race, and that many of them became increasingly prejudiced as time passed due to their long lifespans. Hearing that, Rude asked Alicia if she, being an elf as well, was also one of those who possessed such pride and prejudice. Alicia smiled brightly at his question and confidently replied that she was a very humble, understanding, cute, strong, and charming elf. From her answer alone, Rude quickly realized that she was actually quite prideful. The two of them then walked toward the receptionist's desk, where the receptionist greeted them warmly. She mentioned that the guild master had already informed her about their accomplishments and handed Rude the document for his rank change, explaining that such a promotion was extremely rare. Rude accepted the paper and looked it over, only to be shocked when he saw that he had been promoted directly to B rank, skipping C rank entirely. Overjoyed by the news, Rude felt a surge of pride, and Alicia happily shared in his excitement. The receptionist added that this special promotion reflected just how dangerous and difficult the Yahello new labyrinth quest had truly been. The receptionist informed Rude that they had also received a report from the adventurers in the village he and Alicia had saved. She explained that his defeat of the Baphomet there had been taken into account when determining his new rank. Even after hearing this, Rude still struggled to believe that he had truly become a B-rank adventurer. As he continued trying to process the news, Magnus approached and told him that he should be even happier, adding that the people of the town were deeply grateful for everything he had done for them. Hearing Magnus say this made Rude feel even more joyful. Alicia then stepped in and reminded Rude not to be satisfied with simply reaching B rank. She pointed out that if he wanted to stand on the same level as the S-rank adventurer who had inspired him to take this path, he still had a long way to go. Rude smiled at her words, acknowledging that she was right, and accepted the encouragement. Filled with determination, Rude declared that he would continue pushing forward and work even harder to achieve his dream of becoming an S-rank adventurer. The people around them joined in, cheering him on and offering their support. However, as the lively mood continued, Ebert suddenly appeared and interrupted the celebration, sternly stating that such foolish behavior could not be overlooked. Rude, already fed up with Ebert's attitude, listened as Ebert went on to explain that the information adventurers could access about dungeons was strictly limited according to their rank, a rule created to protect them. He then criticized Rude, saying that someone who had only gained recognition by following others should never have been granted a B rank. Finally, Ebert ended his remarks by openly insulting the Bologna Guild, calling them nothing more than a group of fools, his voice filled with contempt. As Ebert finished his remark, the adventurers of the Bologna Guild glared at him with clear irritation, angered by the insult he had directed at their guild. The receptionist quickly stepped in, interrupting him and firmly stating that regardless of his personal opinion, promotions up to B rank could be granted at the guild's discretion. Magnus then stepped forward, his expression dark with anger, and warned Ebert to retract his insult toward the Bologna Guild and its adventurers or be prepared to face the consequences. In response, several adventurers in a room moved closer, surrounding Ebert as a show of unity. Ebert, however, remained completely unfazed and let out a faint smile, calling Magnus and the others nothing but fools. Enraged by the insult, Magnus grabbed Ebert by the clothes and prepared to strike, but Ebert reacted instantly, seizing Magnus' hand and effortlessly throwing him to the ground. As Magnus fell, Ebert calmly drew his sword and stabbed it into the floor right beside Magnus' ear. In a cold voice, he warned Magnus not to touch him again with his filthy hands. At that moment, Alicia shouted Ebert's name and demanded that he stop. Ebert slowly pulled his sword from the ground and turned toward her, remarking that she had always been too kind, even going so far as to help someone as hopeless as Magnus. Alicia immediately rejected his statement and firmly told him he was completely wrong. Ebert, however, continued speaking without concern, saying that elves by nature were proud and often prejudiced, and he admitted that once he had made up his mind about something, he rarely changed it. As he said this, his expression brightened slightly, and he confidently told Alicia that someone like him, a humble, understanding, and charming elf, was the most suitable person to guide her, since they were of the same race. As Ebert finished speaking, Rude suddenly burst out laughing, surprising everyone present. Ebert frowned at him and demanded to know what he found so amusing. Meanwhile, Rude thought to himself that elves truly were an incredibly prideful race, their arrogance seemingly without limit. Ebert soon regained his composure and turned to address everyone, declaring that he now understood the situation. He claimed that incompetent adventurers were a danger to those around them and announced that he would personally test Rude to see whether he truly deserved the title of a B-rank adventurer. The receptionist quickly stepped forward and firmly reminded Ebert that he had no authority to make such a decision on his own. However, Alicia spoke up and said that she agreed with the spirit of the challenge. She added that if Ebert doubted Rude's abilities, then he would soon see the truth for himself. Not long after, the group gathered at the Bologna Guild's training grounds. Before the fight began, Alicia quietly apologized to Rude, admitting that it was partly because of her that they had ended up in this troublesome situation. Rude shook his head and reassured her that she was not the only one responsible and that his own lack of ability had also contributed. He then told her not to worry, confidently stating that all he needed to do was defeat Ebert, the examiner, and prove that he was worthy of standing beside her as her partner. With a confident smile, Rude added that in the world of adventurers, strength was the only thing capable of silencing doubt. Soon after, the two opponents stood facing each other in the arena. Alicia addressed them both and declared that if either of them suffered a serious injury, she would immediately step in to stop the fight. With that warning given, she signaled that the battle was about to begin. The moment Alicia gave the signal, both fighters rushed toward one another. Their blades collided with a loud clash, and Ebert commented that Rude had some skill since he managed to block the strike. Yet before the words had even settled, Ebert followed with a storm of rapid attacks. Forced onto the defensive, Rude quickly realized that Ebert's swordsmanship far surpassed his own. He also remembered Alicia explaining that Ebert fought by combining offensive magic with enhancement spells. Using his appraisal skill to check Ebert's status, Rude confirmed that he was a magic swordsman who possessed the skills haste and physical boost. While Rude was processing that information, Ebert suddenly vanished from his sight, leaving him momentarily stunned. In the next instant, Ebert appeared behind him and swung his blade in a swift strike. Acting purely on instinct, Rude barely managed to evade the slash. Ebert frowned in irritation after seeing Rude dodge yet again. Rude, still trying to steady himself, realized that he simply could not follow Ebert's movements with his eyes. Even though he wanted to launch a counterattack with his skills, Ebert's speed was clearly on another level. Activating his powers, Ebert proclaimed that he was a B-rank adventurer, a rank granted only to those who possessed strength of this level. He continued by saying that only people who met that standard deserved such a title, and asked if Rude now understood the difference between them. Ebert then bluntly declared that Rude was not worthy of the B-rank title, and certainly not worthy of standing beside Alicia. Hearing those words, Rude admitted that with his current strength, he might indeed be unfit to stand at her side. Even so, his eyes hardened with resolve as he reminded Ebert that Alicia herself had chosen him. Determined to prove it, Rude declared that he would show Ebert he truly deserved both the B-rank title and the right to fight alongside Alicia. As Rude finished speaking, he immediately activated his earth magic principles and prepared to strike back. At the same time, Ebert responded by casting his own magic, causing the two spells to collide violently in midair. Amid the explosive clash, Ebert sneered and mocked Rude, calling him a fool for believing he could win through magic. The spectators watching the battle were stunned by the sheer force of the collision and began wondering if the fight was going too far. With a sinister grin, Ebert told Rude that this moment was truly unfortunate for him. Without hesitation, he activated an even stronger spell and confidently declared that this was the true difference between their levels. He released the magic with overwhelming power and ordered Rude to kneel before him. In a shocking twist, Rude raised his sword and blocked the attack. To everyone's disbelief, the magic Ebert had unleashed was completely absorbed by the blade. The audience stared in amazement as Rude remained standing, unmoved by the overwhelming spell. Ebert froze for a brief moment, stunned that his magic had been absorbed so easily. Taking advantage of that hesitation, Rude calmly stated that he had expected Ebert to rely on magic, since elves were known for their pride. Without giving him time to recover, Rude launched a powerful strike. The two then began exchanging a rapid series of fierce blows, their battle growing more intense with every passing moment. As the fight continued, Ebert noticed that Rude's speed and strength had suddenly increased to a completely different level than before. While clashing blades, Ebert questioned him and asked if the weapon he was using was a magic sword. Rude smirked and corrected him, revealing that he was mistaken and explaining that the blade he carried was not a magic sword at all, but a cursed sword. Ebert was startled to see Rude wielding a cursed sword and quickly declared that this only proved why Alicia should never be associated with someone like him. With those words, Ebert activated his magic skill, Lightning Attribute Enchantment. As electricity surged around him, he confidently announced that Rude would no longer be able to keep up with his speed. In the next instant, Ebert dashed forward and struck Rude in the chest with a powerful lightning palm. The spectators gasped at the incredible speed and force of the attack. After landing the blow, Ebert smirked and told Rude that he had never been anything remarkable. Turning toward Alicia, he told her to declare the result of the match. But just as he spoke, Rude suddenly grabbed Ebert by the collar with a grin. Completely unfazed, Rude apologized and calmly explained that lightning would not work on him. At that moment, a system notification appeared, confirming that the paralysis status effect had been nullified. Ebert stared in disbelief as Rude remained standing despite the lightning attack and insisted that it was impossible since the strike should have paralyzed him. Before he could react further, Rude suddenly slammed his head into Ebert's, knocking him down to the ground. Rude then drove his sword into the ground beside Ebert's head, while apologizing and casually mentioning that lately he had been developing resistance to more and more things. The spectators erupted into cheers at the unexpected outcome, their excitement filling the training grounds as Rude was declared the victor. Meanwhile, inside the guild master's office, Lankar spoke with the Lord of Golar and explained that the feudal lord was currently busy with official duties in the capital, leaving him in charge as deputy. Lankars assured the Lord of Golar that he understood his demands and added that, with his group overseeing the management, they would cooperate fully with the efforts to compensate for the damages suffered by him and his territory. The Lord of Golar angrily raised his voice and told Lankars that what he required was compensation, not empty promises of cooperation. He insisted that a proper sum of money was owed to them due to their rightful ownership of the labyrinth. The Lord further accused Lankars and his group of acting out of greed, claiming they had taken more than their share and would now have to pay the appropriate price for it. Before Lankars could respond, his assistant suddenly rushed into the office, interrupting the tense exchange. She urgently reported that something unusual was occurring at the site of the Yahello new labyrinth, which had previously been confirmed to have completely collapsed. According to her report, the surrounding area was now overflowing with an unprecedented concentration of mana, reaching levels equivalent to B rank. Hearing this news left Lankar stunned, struggling to believe the report he had just received. The assistant continued, explaining that 2 gargoyles were currently guarding the entrance of the labyrinth, preventing anyone from approaching. Lankars then spoke up and remarked that this was clearly not the time to waste energy on petty disputes. The Lord and the Guild Master of Golar immediately grew furious after hearing their argument dismissed as trivial. Nevertheless, Lankars remained focused and declared that they would assemble a subjugation force and head to the Yahello new labyrinth at once to investigate the situation. He then instructed his assistant to immediately summon every adventurer ranked B and above, including Rude. Soon afterward, all of the B rank and higher adventurers gathered inside Lankars' office. Lankars quickly briefed them on what had happened at the Yahello new labyrinth, explaining the collapse and the strange developments that had followed. After finishing his explanation, he announced that the labyrinth cycle had officially begun and emphasized that they would depart immediately to subdue the labyrinth and resolve the situation as quickly as possible. Rude asked Alicia what Lankars meant by a labyrinth cycle, and she explained that it was a phenomenon in which a labyrinth evolved into a new form. She added that it was extremely rare and that she had only ever heard of it happening a few times. Alicia continued by saying that this particular situation was even more unusual because the labyrinth had already collapsed, making it the first time she had encountered something like this. She also pointed out that the mana concentration around the labyrinth reaching B rank levels was something that hardly ever happened. Rue tried to reassure her by saying that since they were now B rank adventurers, and there were also A rank adventurers present, the situation should be manageable. However, before he could finish speaking, Ebert interrupted and remarked that it was understandable for someone who had only just reached B rank to think that way. He warned Rude that he was seriously underestimating how dangerous the situation was. Growing irritated by Ebert's constant interruptions, Rude asked him what his problem was. Ebert calmly replied that if the mana concentration around the labyrinth was already at B rank levels, then the mana inside the labyrinth would most likely be at least A rank. He went on to warn that in the worst case, it could even rise to S rank levels. Alicia then added that, based on what she had heard, the labyrinth was currently evolving like a chrysalis. Once this chrysalis hatched, the surface would be flooded with mana, and since both Golar and Bologna were located nearby, the potential for catastrophic damage was extremely high. As Rude carefully considered what they had said, Lankars stepped in and told him not to worry too much. He reassured Rude that labyrinth cycles were incredibly rare, and because so few cases had ever been recorded, many aspects of them were still unknown, meaning that it was entirely possible their fears might prove unnecessary. Lankars then told Rude and Alicia that since they were the ones who had originally cleared the dungeon, he would be counting on them to guide everyone through the current situation. Both of them accepted his request without hesitation. A short while later, the group of adventurers arrived in front of the labyrinth, where two gargoyles stood guarding the entrance. Rude immediately used his appraisal skill on them and discovered that they were level 50, possessing extremely high stats along with several powerful skills. After checking their status, Rude told Alicia that the gargoyles appeared to be slightly stronger than the rolling beetles they had faced before. However, just as he finished speaking, one of the nearby adventurers accidentally made a noise. The gargoyles instantly reacted and rushed toward the group. One of them opened its mouth and unleashed a skill called Petrifying Breath aimed directly at the adventurers. Reacting quickly, Alicia cast a spell and used her magic to counter the attack. The adventurers watching were impressed by her swift response and magical power. Yet as Alicia completed her defense, the second gargoyle suddenly charged straight at her. At that critical moment, Langkars stepped in and struck the creature with a powerful blow. At the same time, the other gargoyle lunged toward Langkars, but the guild master of Golar moved forward and effortlessly cut the monster in half. Witnessing the display of strength, Rude, Alicia, and the other adventurers were left stunned by the power of the two guild masters. Langkars then turned back to the group and urged everyone to hurry and advance into the labyrinth. Rude walked over to the fallen gargoyle and thought to himself that it actually looked like it might be edible. Quietly, he activated his principles of fire magic and used it on the corpse, but the guild master of Golar noticed what he was doing and questioned him about it. Rude calmly replied that gargoyles possessed regenerative abilities and that he had merely finished it off to make sure it wouldn't revive. As the guild master turned and walked away, Rude quickly slipped a piece of the meat into his bag without anyone noticing. As the group continued deeper into the labyrinth, one of the adventurers commented that the miasma felt weaker than before, while another wondered if the dungeon itself had changed in nature. Rude pointed out that although the overall layout and shape of the dungeon seemed mostly the same, things might still be very different as they moved deeper inside. Alicia agreed with him and reminded everyone to remain cautious, warning that there was no way to predict what dangers might appear further ahead. She also added that even if the structure had not changed much, the monsters lurking deeper inside would likely be far stronger. Just as she finished speaking, a large group of monsters suddenly appeared in front of the adventurers. Langkars quickly evaluated the situation and ordered that he would deal with the larger monster while everyone else focused on the smaller ones. At the same time, the guildmaster of Golar activated his skill, Warrior's Honor, and the adventurers affected by it felt their attack power surge, allowing them to move more freely and strike with greater strength. As the monsters rushed forward, the adventurers quickly began cutting down the smaller creatures. Alicia called out to Rude and urged him to join the fight, but she became confused when she saw him standing still with a worried expression. At that moment, a system notification appeared before Rude, informing him that the abnormal status nullification skill Warrior's Honor had been nullified. While the other adventurers clashed fiercely with the monsters, Rude stood unmoving, deep in thought as he came to an unexpected realization that his abnormal status nullification ability was not only canceling harmful effects, but also negating beneficial support magic, something he had not accounted for. Amid the chaos, one adventurer stepped forward and declared that he would take control of the battlefield, activating his provoke skill to draw all the monsters' attention toward himself. And as they charged recklessly, he followed up with Intercept Barrier, releasing a powerful shockwave that sent them all flying backward. Seizing the opportunity, he signaled to his allies, and Ebert responded instantly by rushing forward and unleashing his Lightning Emperor's Sword, a devastating strike that wiped out the majority of the enemies in one sweep. The remaining adventurers quickly capitalized on the momentum, finishing off the survivors, while one of them warned that these monsters were particularly troublesome, as their weaknesses were not easily discernible, leaving brute force as the only reliable strategy. Without hesitation, they unleashed a relentless barrage of skills, overwhelming the creatures and rapidly clearing the area. But just as they began to gain control, the adventurer, maintaining provoke, shouted that his skill was about to wear off, urging everyone to remain cautious. In that critical moment, a monster burst out from beneath the ground, catching him completely off guard as it seized him in its grasp, poised to deliver a killing strike. But before it could act, its head was cleanly severed by the others, who reacted just in time to save him. Left shaken but alive, the adventurer exhaled in relief and expressed his gratitude, fully aware of how close he had come to death. Rude watched the other adventurers closely, recognizing not only their overwhelming strength, but also the seamless coordination that bound them together, making it difficult to believe they had assembled only moments ago. A quiet frustration settled within him as he realized he had contributed nothing to the battle, leaving him standing on the sidelines. His attention sharpened when he noticed something writhing out from the monster's body, and it quickly became clear that parasites were spilling forth in disturbing numbers. Acting on instinct, he invoked his principles of earth magic and hurled an attack toward the creature, only to freeze in disbelief as the monster absorbed the assault completely, causing his magic to dissipate as if it had never existed. Shocked but determined, he activated his appraisal skill and uncovered the monster's ability, Earth Removal, a power capable of nullifying anything formed from rock or soil. Before he could react further, the Guild Master of Golar appeared and ended the threat in an instant, cleanly severing the monster's head with a decisive strike. The man then turned his attention to Rude, making it clear that parasitic creatures like this were best handled through immediate decapitation, while also criticizing his reckless use of earth magic against an enemy born from the ground. He further revealed that Rude had unknowingly nullified the warrior's honor enchantment placed upon the group, a mistake that only deepened Rude's disappointment in himself. The realization struck hard as he acknowledged his lack of experience in coordinated combat, leaving him unable to even benefit from the support of his allies, and he began to see himself as nothing more than a burden dragging the group down. As these thoughts weighed heavily on him, Ebert drew attention to his struggle, reinforcing the importance of teamwork against formidable foes and diminishing Rude's earlier victory by reducing him to the level of a mere miasma scavenger, ultimately implying that he had no place among them. While this unfolded, Rude caught sight of Alicia standing just behind Ebert, her gaze sharp and filled with anger at the harsh judgment being directed his way. In the midst of the chaos, a massive explosion tore through the battlefield, hurling Lankars violently across the ground as the force of the blast rippled outward. An adventurer hurried to his side in concern, but Lankars remained composed, shifting the focus away from himself and urging everyone to pay attention to the true threat unfolding before them. He revealed that the monsters were beginning to infest the corpses of their fallen allies, taking them over one after another in a horrifying display. Worse still, these parasites were not only restoring the monsters' wounds, but amplifying their strength at an alarming rate, turning the tide of battle with each passing moment. Despite the grim situation, the Guild Master of Golar maintained a calm perspective, recognizing that there was at least one advantage in that the enemy would ultimately converge into a single body. He prepared to step in and assist Lankars, but in that very instant, a sharp sensation struck the back of his ear, causing him to freeze as realization dawned. The source was a tiny, nearly unnoticed creature, and in that moment he grasped the true nature of the threat, understanding that these small monsters were designed to inject a petrifying poison into their targets. The realization came too late, as one by one, the adventurers who had been bitten began to turn to stone, their bodies locking in place as the battlefield fell into eerie stillness. Sensing victory, the monster advanced with its weapon drawn, aiming to finish off the immobilized Lankars. But just before the fatal strike could connect, Rude stepped in and altered the course of the attack using his thread manipulation, deflecting it away. Standing firm, Rude made it clear that the assault had failed because he remained unaffected, his abnormal status nullification having completely negated the petrification inflicted by the insect-like creatures. With the others incapacitated, he took control of the situation, entrusting the battle to himself as he moved toward Alicia and activated Substitute, transferring her petrified state onto himself to restore her. As she regained her mobility, the tension shifted, and with renewed focus, Rude prepared both himself and Alicia for the confrontation that lay ahead against the increasingly dangerous monsters. Rude activated his appraisal skill and assessed the monster, discovering that it stood at level 66 and possessed a wide range of abilities that made it a formidable opponent. After analyzing it further, he concluded that it lacked any particularly troublesome magical resistances, leading him to coordinate with Alicia by proposing a strategy in which she would destabilize the creature with magic, while he seized the opportunity to rush in. Alicia moved in sync with his plan, calling forth her spirits, Nomia and Sylphide, and unleashing a concentrated attack that struck the monster squarely on the head, driving it into the ground with immense force. However, the creature refused to stay down, quickly rising again as its body shifted and transformed, catching both of them off guard with its resilience. Before they could regroup, the monster opened its mouth, releasing a swarm of smaller creatures that poured out in overwhelming numbers and rushed toward them. Without hesitation, Rude took responsibility for the incoming threat, activating his lightning cloak and erasing the swarm in a flash, leaving nothing behind as the battlefield cleared. For a brief moment, he and Alicia stood firm after eliminating the smaller enemies, while nearby, Lankars remained trapped in stone, unable to move yet fully conscious of everything unfolding before him, a detail unknown to the two still engaged in battle. Unaware of his silent observation, they pressed forward without pause, only for a larger monster to suddenly emerge and charge at them with lethal intent. This time, both Rude and Alicia were already prepared, their stances set as they anticipated the incoming assault. As the creature lunged in, Alicia tracked its movement with precision and reacted instantly, countering with one of her techniques and channeling her earth magic to launch the monster upward before it could strike. The force of her attack sent it soaring into the air, and in one seamless motion, she shifted her focus toward Rude, signaling that the next move belonged to him. Rude responded without delay, bursting forward at full speed and activating Flash Step, his body turning into a blur as he closed the distance in an instant, positioning himself perfectly to strike the airborne target. Still reeling from the force of the blow and its abrupt launch into the air, the creature spun downward in a chaotic descent, its senses scrambled as it struggled to regain control of its tumbling body. Even so, the creature refused to yield, its will to fight remaining intact despite the devastating injury, as fragments of its body rained down while the remaining half pressed forward with undiminished ferocity. Driven by pure aggression, the mutilated beast lunged again without hesitation, throwing itself at Rude in a reckless assault that ignored its own condition. From a distance, Alicia noticed the danger unfolding and reacted immediately, attempting to warn him. Just as the monster lifted its mangled form to deliver a finishing strike, the attack was abruptly stopped by a sudden clash of force that froze its claws in midair. Standing between Rude and the creature was Lankars, who had somehow broken free from his petrified state and now held his ground with unwavering resolve. Without wasting a second, he drove forward with a sharp and forceful counterattack that sent the monster flying backward across the battlefield. Rude could only stare in stunned disbelief. Unable to ignore the question any longer, Rude sought an explanation, his confusion evident as he tried to understand how such a recovery had been possible. Lankars, composed as ever, revealed that by steadily circulating his internal magic, he had gradually broken down the petrification from within, though the effort had required both time and endurance. With that exchange over, their focus shifted back to the enemy, which still refused to fall despite the damage it had suffered, its broken form continuing to radiate hostility as it prepared for yet another assault. Lankars met Rude's eyes with steady confidence, signaling that the drawn-out battle had reached its final moments, and Rude responded in kind, his resolve sharpening as he claimed the finishing strike for himself. Channeling his strength without hesitation, he gathered his mana and funneled it into his blade, causing the weapon to flare with intense brilliance as raw power surged through it, pushing it to the peak of its destructive potential. Sensing the overwhelming surge of power gathering before it, the monster released a guttural roar and hurled itself forward in a final, desperate charge toward Rude and Lankars, its approach shaking the ground beneath it. Rude remained unmoving, his gaze fixed sharply on the incoming threat, and at the precise moment the creature's claws neared him, his focus sharpened to its peak. In one seamless motion, he unleashed a decisive swing, channeling the full extent of his mana through his blade as it cut through the air with lethal precision. The strike connected flawlessly, cleaving the monster into two halves in an instant. Its massive form split cleanly as the momentum carried both pieces forward before they collapsed lifelessly onto the ground. A slow breath escaped Rude as he lowered his weapon, the radiant glow fading as the battlefield fell into an eerie silence, broken only by the faint remnants of dissipating energy. Beside him, Lankars gave a subtle nod of approval, marking the apparent end of the battle, and for a brief moment, Rude allowed himself to feel a sense of satisfaction as pride welled within him, realizing he had achieved a new level of control over his mana by channeling it so precisely into his strike. That sense of accomplishment, however, was short-lived, as the reality of the situation quickly resurfaced. Despite being reduced to scattered remains, the monster had not been completely defeated, its regenerative nature revealing itself as the severed pieces began to twitch and slowly mend. The danger had not passed, and the urgency of the moment became clear once more as Alicia reacted from a distance, drawing attention back to the lingering threat. Her warning snapped Rude out of his brief satisfaction, bringing his focus back to the battle as he immediately grasped the need for decisive action. Without delay, His resolve hardened, and he moved to ensure the creature would not recover again, activating a specialized ability known as Venomous Stinger. As the skill took form, countless needle-like projectiles manifested from his hands, each one glinting with a toxic sheen before launching forward in a precise barrage aimed at the monster's scattered remains. The instant the needles embedded themselves into the creature's flesh, its body convulsed violently, a piercing cry accompanying the rapid spread of venom as it coursed through every fragment. Rude remained vigilant, watching closely as the final traces of the creature faded away, making certain that this time there would be no chance of recovery. Nearby, Alicia observed the scene with clear admiration, noting how effectively the poison had spread faster than a monster could heal, and recognizing how decisively the technique had shifted the outcome of the battle. Lankars approached from behind, his presence marked by a subtle hint of amusement as he drew attention to the fact that revealing such abilities so openly might not be without consequences. The remark caught Rude off guard, leaving him briefly uncertain as he considered the growing attention surrounding him and the challenge of explaining everything that had just occurred. Alicia, having followed the exchange, shared the same concern, recognizing that concealing such a truth indefinitely would only create greater complications, as it was bound to surface eventually. Accepting that the situation could no longer be avoided, Rude resolved to address it directly and chose to begin by restoring the adventurers who had been petrified during the fight using his substitute skill. Acting without hesitation, he moved forward with his decision, understanding that trust would be essential moving ahead. Before long, he succeeded in freeing all those who had been turned to stone, and once they regained their movement, he took it upon himself to explain everything, revealing his unique ability to consume monsters and how doing so not only sustained him but also granted him access to the skills of the creatures he absorbed. Lankars was the first to respond, acknowledging that while such power would normally be difficult to accept, the battle they had just witnessed erased any doubt, as Rude's overwhelming display of skill had already proven its authenticity. Nearby, Ebert reacted with unexpected enthusiasm, stepping forward and firmly grasping Rude's hand as he expressed amazement at encountering something so unprecedented. Despite hearing this, Rude found his thoughts drifting to the inconsistency, recalling how not long ago Ebert had dismissed him as unfit to stand among true adventurers. Before Rude could process or respond, another adventurer stepped forward, her curiosity clearly piqued as she sought confirmation about his ability to consume monster flesh. Meeting her gaze, Rude allowed a faint smile to form before calmly bending down to gather several remains from the defeated creatures scattered across the battlefield. Lifting them without hesitation, he glanced back toward the group with a hint of amusement, silently implying his intent to prepare and eat a portion of the monsters on the spot. Soon after, Rude became completely engrossed in preparing the freshly obtained monster meat, his focus unwavering as curious adventurers gathered around to watch. He emphasized that achieving a proper result depended on slow, careful cooking over a gentle flame. Drawing out a selection of aromatic herbs, he coated the meat generously, letting their natural oils infuse into it and transform both its scent and taste into something far more appealing. When the preparation was complete, Rude wasted no time in taking a bite, his expression instantly shifting to one of clear satisfaction as he savored the result. The surrounding adventurers observed in silence, their earlier doubt gradually softening into reluctant admiration as the sight and aroma of the finished dish proved far more enticing than anticipated. What had once seemed unthinkable began to appear unexpectedly appealing, and some found themselves reconsidering their assumptions as the rich, savory scent filled the air. While the adventurers remained locked in debate, the sound of approaching footsteps cut through the tension as the guild master of Golar arrived, calmly surveying the scene before his attention fixed on Rude and the faint, glowing aura surrounding him. Sensing something unusual, he stepped closer and questioned whether consuming monster flesh restored Rude's magic. But Rude clarified that it was mana, not magic power, which only heightened the guildmaster's curiosity due to its remarkable purity and lack of corruption. The brief silence that followed carried a sense of unease as the realization set in that Rude was far from ordinary. And soon after, the guildmaster shifted the conversation to the unknown danger lurking within the labyrinth, suggesting a temporary retreat for reinforcements. However, Lankars dismissed the idea without hesitation, arguing that any delay would only allow the situation to worsen and make the challenge ahead even more difficult. Lankars spoke with steady confidence, expressing trust in the group's strength as he resolved to push deeper into the labyrinth without outside help despite the risks ahead. As they advanced, Rude recalled his previous journey and noted they should be close to the boss chamber, guiding them along a familiar path with calm certainty until he suddenly halted at the sight of a massive collapse blocking the passage. Realizing it was the result of an earlier battle he had overlooked. Acknowledging the mistake, he assessed the situation while the group pressed forward, though Lankars soon voiced frustration, suggesting that clearing the obstruction would take too long, and that retreat might be their only option. Despite this, Rude quickly formed a plan, stepping forward with renewed confidence as he activated soil and earth removal, causing the ground to tremble as the debris crumbled and vanished. The path gradually cleared before their eyes, leaving the adventurers stunned in silence before their amazement surfaced as Rude effortlessly turned an impossible obstacle into a way forward. With the path cleared, Rude turned to the group and calmly stated that the boss chamber lay just ahead, urging them forward as his confidence steadied their resolve. Upon entering, however, they stopped abruptly, stunned by the massive, unfamiliar object dominating the chamber's center, its presence both imposing and unsettling. As Rude studied it in confusion, Lankars stepped forward and revealed it to be the egg of the wise dragon, a name that meant little to Rude and deepened the tension in the room. Lankars then explained, drawing from ancient records, that the wise dragon was a mythical being bound to a cycle of death and rebirth, its soul reincarnating within labyrinths while retaining all its knowledge, granting it intelligence and awareness far beyond ordinary creatures. The weight of this revelation settled heavily over the group, but the silence was soon broken by an adventurer who dismissed the legend, viewing the egg as a simple threat that could be eliminated before it hatched. Acting immediately, he activated physical magnification, his body swelling with power as he charged forward, intent on destroying the egg in a single decisive blow. Lankars's keen gaze caught a subtle flicker of movement, and sensing that something was wrong, he reacted immediately, attempting to stop the advancing adventurer, but the warning came a moment too late. In an instant, it unleashed a violent counterattack, striking him before his blow could land and sending him hurtling across the chamber, his body crashing heavily against the stone wall. A stunned silence followed as he collapsed, groaning in pain, the severity of the impact clearly leaving him injured. One of his companions rushed to his side, concern evident, though his attention was quickly drawn back to the egg as it began to show signs of movement. Its once still surface now trembled faintly, subtle ripples spreading across the shell as if something within had begun to stir. While he remained downed, Lankars stepped forward, his composed yet firm presence cutting through the tension as he directed the injured man to stay back and avoid worsening his condition. In that moment, Rude activated his appraisal skill, focusing intently on the wise dragon sealed within the egg. And as the information revealed itself, he was taken aback to see that it was only level 1. Yet the initial sense of relief quickly faded as he continued examining the details, his expression tightening when he realized that every single attribute remained completely concealed, offering no insight into the creature's true capabilities and leaving him with a growing sense of unease. Sensing the shift in atmosphere, as the tension deepened, one adventurer suggested a cautious retreat to wait for reinforcements. But the guild master of Golar stepped forward and firmly dismissed the idea, explaining that once the egg had begun to stir, even the strongest support, including S-class adventurers, would make no difference, as the wise dragon's awakening could no longer be stopped. His words silenced the group, and in the next moment, Lankars moved ahead with unwavering resolve, rejecting retreat entirely and declaring that their only option was to face the threat now before it reached full power. Lankars immediately took command of the battle, ordering the magicians to focus their attacks on the dragon's legs to restrict its movement, and they responded without delay, unleashing a relentless barrage of spells that struck its limbs in rapid succession. Taking advantage of the opening, Lankars charged forward with precise, practiced movements and delivered a powerful strike that cleanly severed one of the dragon's legs, a display of skill that left Rude and Alicia watching in stunned silence. However, the moment of triumph vanished as the dragon released a thunderous roar, and to their shock, the severed limb began regenerating before their eyes, restoring itself completely, as if untouched. The unsettling sight sent tension through the group, forcing them to realize their attacks might be futile, while Lankars carefully observed the regeneration, searching for a weakness as he steadied himself for the next phase of the battle, fully aware that the fight ahead would test them to their limits. Langkars turned to Rude with a serious expression, calmly explaining a crucial task with precise clarity, making it evident that the outcome of the battle could depend on it. And Rude listened closely, fully understanding the weight of the responsibility placed upon him. Before he could respond, the dragon's thunderous roar shook the battlefield, disrupting the adventurers. Yet Langkars remained unfazed and finished his instructions, prompting Rude to nod in silent agreement as his resolve hardened. Wasting no time, Langkars charged forward again and, with a swift and decisive strike, severed the dragon's leg once more. But the advantage was short-lived as the dragon suddenly countered, its tail erupting from beneath the ground and coiling around his legs, dragging him down with crushing force. Realizing too late that he had been outmaneuvered, frustration set in as the pressure tightened, threatening to pull him deeper underground while he struggled to break free, until a sudden flash of steel cut through the chaos, signaling an unexpected turn in the battle. In that moment, Langkar's attack struck the dragon, piercing straight through its body and causing the mighty creature to collapse in defeat. Langkars then raised his polearm high, showing everyone that they had successfully defeated the dragon. But as soon as he did so, his body suddenly weakened, and he was about to fall before the Guildmaster of Golar stepped forward and supported him, helping him remain on his feet. The Guildmaster of Golar then admitted that, although he hated to say it, defeating the dragon would not have been possible without everyone's help. And upon hearing that, Langkars remarked that it was arrogant of him to say such a thing. Meanwhile, another adventurer checked on the adventurer who had been struck by the dragon's attack earlier and, after inspecting his condition, informed the others that he was fine and that his life was not in any danger. Hearing this, Rude smiled and loudly declared that they had achieved complete victory over the dragon, prompting the other adventurers to cheer alongside him. However, while the adventurers were celebrating their victory, an unknown individual remained hidden behind the dragon's corpse. And as he observed the jubilant adventurers, he thought to himself that they were quite a cheerful bunch. The man then decided that it was time to retrieve the wise dragon's magic stone and earn a large profit by selling it. But as he searched for the magic stone, he soon became confused when he was unable to find it anywhere. The person then began searching through the dragon's body for the magic stone. But while doing so, a tail suddenly emerged from beneath the ground, and before he could even react, it pierced straight through his body, killing him instantly. At that moment, the dragon emerged from the ground and revealed that it was still alive, although its size was much smaller than before. The dragon then thought to itself that the reincarnation had been a failure, but it was not entirely without value. It added that its current body would not last for very long, meaning it would have to wait for its next reincarnation. But before that, all of the adventurers who had dared to interfere with its reincarnation had to be killed so that there would be no disturbances during its next attempt. Looking at Rude and the other adventurers from a distance with malice in its eyes, the dragon vowed that it would not rest until every adventurer standing before it had been slaughtered. Meanwhile, as the adventurers continued celebrating their supposed victory, the Guildmaster of Golar suddenly felt a sense of unease and realized that the battle was not yet over. He immediately took a defensive stance and shouted to the other adventurers that the fight was still ongoing and that the enemy was still alive, as the monster's presence had not disappeared from the area. Upon hearing this, the adventurers were confused and wondered what the Guildmaster was referring to. But before they could understand the situation, the dragon appeared before them with the blood of the human it had just killed covering its body. The adventurers were shocked to see the dragon standing before them, as they had believed that they had already defeated it. Rude quickly activated his observation skill to inspect the monster's status, and upon doing so, he discovered that the monster's name was the wise dragon Orphis, the very same dragon they thought they had slain. However, when he attempted to view the dragon's status, the information was concealed, preventing him from seeing any of its details. Ebert, who was standing close to Alicia, was in a state of shock as he could not believe that the dragon they had defeated not long ago was still alive and standing before them. Hearing this, Alicia replied in a serious tone that the only logical explanation was that the dragon had burrowed into the ground at the very moment the attack struck, allowing it to evade the fatal blow and remain alive. As soon as Alicia finished saying this, the dragon stepped forward and declared in a menacing voice that the adventurers before it were nothing more than weak and insolent humans, and that it would never allow mere humans to defy a being favored by the gods such as itself. Upon hearing those words, all of the adventurers were surprised that a dragon was capable of speaking the human language, while Rude was equally shocked, as he had never encountered a monster capable of doing such a thing before. Meanwhile, Langkars, who was standing near Rude, he then informed Rude that among the dragonkin, The dragons known as true dragons stood at the highest rank, adding that they were beings who existed close to the gods and were therefore capable of understanding and speaking the language of humans. As soon as Lankars finished speaking, the wise dragon addressed Rude once more, stating that it could sense a detestable impurity within him. The dragon further remarked that Rude resembled a human, yet at the same time also possessed the qualities of a monster. After saying this, the wise dragon rose to its full height, towering over all of the adventurers present, and declared that they should do their utmost to entertain it, while trembling in despair before its immeasurable power. As the dragon made its proclamation, one of the adventurers, the girl with ponytails, activated her skill. While doing so, she silently apologized to the other adventurers and admitted to herself that she could no longer keep up with the battle. She then activated a skill called Dark Envelopment, which wrapped her body in darkness and completely concealed her presence. As the skill took effect, the woman quietly disappeared from the scene without leaving a trace. However, at that very moment, while the adventurers were preparing themselves to face the dragon, one of the dragon's arms suddenly detached from its body and fell to the ground, leaving all of the adventurers stunned by what they had just witnessed. The wise dragon looked at the arm that had fallen from its body and spoke without the slightest hint of fear, as though nothing had happened, stating that its body was beginning to crumble. One of the adventurers, who was filled with fear, wondered why the dragon appeared to be rotting away. But Lankars, after observing the situation, quickly realized that this was the perfect opportunity to take advantage of the dragon's condition. At the same time, Lankars thought to himself that he had already unleashed his strongest skill only moments earlier, and that it had placed a tremendous burden on his body. Ideally, he would have preferred to wait and recover, but judging from the situation before him, it did not seem as though he would be given even a moment to rest. Realizing this, Lankars concluded that he had no choice but to push himself beyond his limits once again. Meanwhile, one of the adventurers stared at the dragon before him and wondered what kind of monster it truly was. Furthermore, he had already exhausted all of his mana and was no longer capable of fighting. Believing that remaining there would only lead to his death, he quickly made up his mind and decided to flee the scene before the dragon could kill all of the adventurers. However, as the adventurer attempted to flee from the scene, the wise dragon noticed his actions and immediately activated one of its skills, telekinesis. Raising its arm, the dragon manipulated the rubble scattered across the ground and hurled it toward the entrance, completely blocking the only route out of the room. The adventurer was shocked to see the exit sealed off, realizing that he no longer had any chance of escaping. At that moment, the wise dragon spoke in a menacing tone, declaring that there was no escape from the wise dragon Orphis. Orphis further stated that the adventurers should not become overconfident simply because it had lost one arm, adding that humans were nothing more than rats, and that even with only one hand remaining, its extermination of them would not be hindered in the slightest. Hearing those words, Lankars loudly responded that if there truly was no way for them to escape, then he and the other adventurers would show the wise dragon the terror of a cornered rat. Upon hearing this, the wise dragon let out a menacing laugh and challenged the humans to do exactly that. Urging them to demonstrate the so-called terror they claimed they could show to the wise dragon Orphis. As the wise dragon finished speaking, Rude, Lankars, Ebert, and the guild master of Golar all charged toward the dragon at the same time. Rude and Lankars were the first to launch their attacks, but their strikes were easily blocked by the dragon. However, the assault did not end there, as Ebert and the guild master of Golar immediately followed up by moving behind the monster and attacking from its rear. Despite this, the dragon's senses were exceptionally sharp, allowing it to detect their presence instantly and evade their attacks with ease. As the four adventurers continued their relentless assault, they all realized how dire their situation was. No matter how many times they attacked, not a single strike was able to land on the dragon. To them, it felt as though every movement they made was being effortlessly read by the wise dragon, leaving them unable to do anything against it. After enduring the continuous attacks, the dragon confidently asked whether that was all they were capable of and stated that it wanted them to entertain it more, as their current efforts were far from enough. As soon as it said this, the wise dragon let out a deafening roar and unleashed a violent burst of magical energy, creating powerful shockwaves that swept through the area and sent all four adventurers flying backward at tremendous speed. Alicia, upon seeing Rude being sent flying and crashing into a wall, immediately rushed over to check on him. She quickly called out to him and asked whether he had been hurt or injured, and Rude got back to his feet and told her that he was fine. However, he added that their situation was still far from favorable. as during their previous battle against the dragon, he had nearly exhausted all of his remaining mana. Because of this, he explained that defeating the dragon in their current condition would be extremely difficult. Hearing this, Alicia carefully considered the situation before turning her gaze toward the dragon with a determined expression. She then told Rude that she intended to end the battle in a single move by utilizing the Quintet of Spirits and asked him to relay her message to the other adventurers. Rude agreed with her plan and assured her that he would do so. He then activated a skill that allowed him to communicate telepathically with the other adventurers and connected Alicia's voice to all of them. Alicia then informed everyone that she was about to unleash a powerful attack against the wise dragon and instructed them to coordinate their movements and be prepared to dodge when the time came. Everyone agreed with Alicia's plan and assured her that they understood what needed to be done. Upon hearing this, Alicia began focusing her magic and asked all of the adventurers present to lend her their strength. At that moment, all of the spirits under her control gathered together and formed a massive sphere of energy. While Alicia concentrated on preparing her attack, the other adventurers focused on distracting the dragon so that it would be unable to interfere with her while she channeled her powerful magic. After several moments, Alicia finally completed her preparations and called out to Rude, informing him that it was time for the adventurers to move away from the dragon because she was about to unleash her attack. Rude immediately connected Alicia's voice to the rest of the adventurers, and she gave them the signal to retreat. In an instant, they all distanced themselves from the dragon, and Alicia unleashed her powerful skill, Quintet of Spirits. Upon seeing the attack, the wise dragon attempted to defend itself, but it was already too late. The attack struck the dragon directly, triggering a massive explosion that shook the surrounding area. As the adventurers watched the aftermath, Ebert asked whether they had finally defeated the dragon and if the battle was over. However, as the smoke gradually cleared, the dragon was revealed to still be standing. Although it had suffered severe injuries, it remained alive and breathing, leaving Ebert unable to believe that the dragon had managed to survive even after enduring their countless attacks. The dragon, bruised and battered from the battle, told the adventurers that the outcome was exactly as it had expected and admitted that it had been too careless in underestimating them. Alicia was left in a state of shock, unable to believe that the dragon had survived even after being struck by her most powerful attack. However, Lankars did not hesitate and immediately charged toward the dragon to deliver another powerful strike. Despite its injuries, the dragon's senses remained incredibly sharp, allowing it to block Lankar's attack with ease. At the same time, it swung its tail toward him, landing a powerful blow that sent Lankars flying backward at tremendous speed before crashing into a wall. The adventurers were alarmed upon seeing Lankars being thrown away and immediately called out to check whether he was still alright. At that moment, one of the adventurers took the initiative and activated his magic skill, Bind. Instantly, hundreds of vines erupted from the ground and wrapped themselves around the dragon's body, restraining its movements. As the dragon struggled against the vines, Ebert seized the opportunity and launched himself toward it. However, just as he was about to drive his sword into the dragon's body, the wise dragon reacted with incredible speed and used its mouth to stop the attack. At the very moment it blocked the strike, it bit down on Ebert's sword and snapped it cleanly in half. Ebert was shocked that the wise dragon had not only blocked his attack, but had also broken his weapon in half. However, the dragon did not give him any time to recover and immediately swung its tail at him with tremendous force, sending Ebert flying backward at high speed. The dragon then shifted its attention to the other adventurer and effortlessly broke free from the vines that had been restraining it. Turning toward the adventurer who had used the vines, the dragon declared that such cheap tricks were nowhere near enough to halt its advance. Enjoying the sight of its enemies struggling helplessly against it, the dragon remarked that watching them fight in vain was a pleasant sight. Meanwhile, Alicia remained frozen in shock as she observed the situation unfolding before her, no longer knowing what she could do. Looking at the injured adventurers lying on the ground after their battle against the dragon, she blamed herself and thought that all of this had happened because she lacked the necessary power. The sight of her fallen comrades brought back painful memories of the past, when she had been unable to save her former teammates. As those memories resurfaced, she felt as though history was repeating itself and believed that she had once again failed to protect the people fighting alongside her. While Alicia stood there consumed by those thoughts, the wise dragon slowly moved closer and closer toward her. As it approached, it declared that it would kill her and use her as nourishment for its wisdom. Faced with the dragon's overwhelming presence, Alicia no longer knew what to do and simply stood there in silence, accepting the fate that awaited her at the dragon's hands. Rude, covered in bruises from the battle, realized that they would never be able to defeat the wise dragon if things continued the way they were. He began considering the possibility of escaping, as it seemed to be the only viable option left to them given how overwhelmingly powerful the dragon was. Rude then thought that if they could somehow buy enough time and reach the escape magic circle located at the core of the labyrinth, they might still be able to get away safely. With that idea in mind, he attempted to activate his thread manipulation skill, but the moment he did, he was startled to discover that he could no longer use it. It was then that he realized he had finally exhausted all of his remaining mana. Rude was shocked by this realization and found himself a loss as to what he should do next after the prolonged battle had completely drained him. Meanwhile, the dragon showed no signs of slowing down and continued attacking the adventurers, inflicting heavy damage upon them one after another. Unable to mount any meaningful resistance, the adventurers could do little but endure the dragon's relentless assault. As Rude observed the situation, he grimly concluded that if things continued at this pace and they remained unable to stop the dragon, all of them would be wiped out within moments. He further realized that unless he could somehow recover his mana, any hope of escaping the danger or turning the situation around would be lost. However, while Rude was thinking about their hopeless situation, something suddenly caught his attention. It was none other than the corpse of the wise dragon they had fought earlier before it had taken on its current form. As he stared at the body, an idea came to mind. Rude had no way of knowing whether his plan would work, but given their desperate circumstances, it was the only solution he could think of. Meanwhile, the dragon continued its assault and unleashed dragon breath, spewing flames toward the adventurers. Alicia immediately summoned her wind spirit, Sylphide, to intercept the attack, and just as the flames were about to engulf the adventurers, she successfully redirected and blocked the dragon's breath. As Alicia focused on preventing the dragon from pressing its attack, the Guildmaster of Golar seized the opportunity to make his move. Taking advantage of the dragon's distraction, he activated his skill, Flying Blade, and launched it directly at the wise dragon. However, just as the attack was about to connect, the dragon noticed it and immediately activated its skill, Magic Process. In an instant, a massive wall rose from the ground and blocked the Guildmaster's attack before it could reach its target. The moment the dragon defended itself, it retaliated by casting two skills simultaneously, Water Bullet and L-Slash, directing them toward Alicia and the Guildmaster of Golar. The two of them had no choice but to focus on defending against the attacks coming their way. By the time the dragon ceased its assault, both Alicia and the Guildmaster of Golar were covered in bruises, and the Guildmaster could not help but think about how troublesome the wide variety of skills the dragon possessed truly was. Although he had managed to block the attacks, they had still inflicted considerable damage on him. Seeing that the two had successfully defended themselves, the dragon spoke up and declared that it would use another skill, expressing its curiosity as to whether they would be able to block this one as well. At that moment, the dragon activated a new skill, which turned out to be Charge, the very same skill Lankars had previously used to inflict significant damage upon it. The Guildmaster Golar was astonished to witness the dragon using a human skill, as he had never encountered a monster capable of copying the abilities of its opponents. It was then that he realized this was the terrifying power possessed by the Dragon of Wisdom. However, as the dragon continued charging the skill, the Guildmaster quickly pointed out to Alicia that the technique had a flaw. Just as with Lankars, whenever he used it, the user became defenseless while the skill was being charged. Recognizing this opening, the Guildmaster suggested that if they intended to attack the dragon, now was the perfect opportunity, as the dragon was temporarily vulnerable while preparing the skill. Upon hearing the Guildmaster of Golar's suggestion, Alicia agreed and told him that she would provide support while he launched the attack against the dragon. As soon as she said this, Alicia activated her skill and summoned two of her spirits, Erdiel and Wakian. Using their power, she imbued the Guildmaster's blade with magic, enhancing it with water-enveloped sword and water lightning blade. The Guildmaster was surprised when he looked at his weapon and felt how much stronger it had become, but he had no time to admire it. Seizing what appeared to be an opening, he immediately charged toward the dragon while it was still defenseless. However, just as his blade was about to strike, the Guildmaster suddenly sensed that something was wrong. It was exactly as he feared the situation had been a trap set by the dragon from the very beginning. By then, it was already too late for him to retreat. As he closed the distance, the dragon swiftly attacked and drove its tail straight through the middle of his body. Witnessing what had just happened, Alicia was left in a state of shock. She no longer knew what to do, as every action they took seemed to be anticipated and immediately countered by the dragon. While Alicia was still struggling to process the situation, the dragon suddenly used its telekinesis and seized one of her spirits. As it did so, it remarked that spirits were a rare species and wondered what one would taste like after being consumed. Hearing this, Alicia immediately panicked and pleaded with the wise dragon to stop, but her words were meaningless. The dragon simply opened its mouth and, within moments, crushed the spirit between its jaws. Alicia collapsed to her knees, unable to believe what had just happened or what she had witnessed with her own eyes. Tears began to form as she desperately told herself that it could not be real and refused to accept what had just occurred. Seeing the despair on Alicia's face, the dragon began speaking once more, explaining that charging techniques were traditionally used against opponents stronger than oneself, as they required the user to leave themselves defenseless in exchange for unleashing immense power. However, the dragon added that there had never been any need for it to use such a technique against mere rats like Alicia and the other adventurers. In a menacing tone, the wise dragon then asked Alicia whether she understood why it had resorted to such a deceitful tactic. Without waiting for an answer, it explained that the sole reason was to witness the despair on their faces when they believed they had found hope against it, only for that hope to be crushed at the very last moment and replaced with complete despair. Alicia's eyes were filled with tears as she lost all hope, while the wise dragon took pleasure in watching her despair. Enjoying the sight before it, the dragon declared that it was now time to taste the flavor of an elf. As it opened its mouth and lowered its head toward Alicia, preparing to devour her, Rude suddenly appeared with his body enveloped in a powerful red aura. Charging forward at incredible speed, he slammed into the dragon's head and delivered a powerful blow that both pushed the dragon back and inflicted significant damage upon it. Alicia was stunned by Rude's sudden appearance, but as she looked at him more closely, she immediately sensed that something was wrong. She called out to him and asked whether he was all right, but before she could receive any response, Rude stood up while continuing to emit the powerful red aura and let out a loud roar. The dragon, already bruised and battered from the battle, had suffered especially severe damage where Rude had struck it. One of its eyes had been torn from its socket, and the wound was so devastating that parts of the bone beneath its face were now visible. The sheer force of Rude's attack had caused an extraordinary amount of destruction. Upon seeing the condition of its body, the dragon remarked that its current form was still incomplete and that this was the reason it was sustaining such severe injuries from attacks delivered by mere humans. However, after saying that, the dragon turned its attention toward Rude and immediately noticed that something about him had changed. Upon realizing what had happened, the dragon declared that Rude had consumed the dragon's eggshell and had now begun transforming into a monster, causing him to lose his human senses. Despite the overwhelming transformation taking place within him, Rude still retained a small amount of control over his mind. Alicia, however, tried to reassure him, telling him that he did not need to worry and that everything would be all right. Unfortunately, with each passing second, it became increasingly difficult for Rude to maintain control over himself. Eventually, he lost control and went berserk, accidentally attacking Alicia, who was standing nearby. The force of the attack sent her flying backward. As a result of the blow, Alicia began losing consciousness, but even in that state, her concern remained focused on Rude. Using what little strength she had left, she continued calling out to him, unable to stop worrying about him despite the fact that he had just injured her. Observing that Rude was gradually losing control of himself, the dragon remarked that it was intrigued by the fact that Rude had absorbed such an enormous amount of mana from the dragon's body, and yet had still managed to avoid fully turning into a monster. However, the dragon added that this did not change anything, as Rude would not be able to maintain his human form for much longer. According to the dragon, with every passing second, Rude was drawing closer to becoming a monster, and for that reason, it concluded that Rude was no longer worth its time dealing with. Meanwhile, Rude, who still retained a small amount of consciousness, felt as though his entire body was burning from within. It seemed to him that he was gradually losing himself, and that his body would not be able to endure much longer under the strain of the tremendous amount of mana he had absorbed. Dropping to his knees, Rude struggled desperately to control the mana raging inside him. At that moment, however, a voice suddenly called out to him. It belonged to none other than the red-haired girl with ponytails, who had reappeared after everyone had assumed that she had already escaped from the area. Looking at Rude as he fought to maintain control of himself, the red-haired woman smiled and commented that his mana control was extremely sloppy. She then informed him that she was going to help him gain control over his mana. As she said that, the girl placed her hand on Rude's back, and a blue aura began flowing from her hand into his body. As the energy continued to circulate through him, Rude gradually regained control over both his body and his consciousness. Surprised by what the woman had done, he could hardly believe that she had helped him stabilize the mana within him. At that moment, he could feel the mana harmonizing with his body, a sensation unlike anything he had ever experienced before. The dragon, upon witnessing this, was equally surprised, as it could not understand how Rude had managed to regain his consciousness instead of completely losing control. The girl then returned Rude's sword to him and, as she handed it over, told him to go and finish off the half-dead lizard. Rude, confused by the girl's identity, wanted to know who she was and how she had been able to help him control his mana. However, before he could receive an answer, the wise dragon, enraged by the way the girl had referred to it, shouted in fury that they were not to mock the gods by calling the wise dragon a mere half-dead lizard. With those words, it let out a deafening roar and charged toward Rude and the girl with tremendous force. The girl merely smiled and continued provoking the dragon, mockingly remarking that the lizard dragon, who was also a bookworm, could not even handle a little teasing and was now throwing a tantrum because of it. Her words only fueled the dragon's rage further, causing it to attack Rude recklessly. However, just as the attack was about to land, Rude responded with a strike of his own. In a single instant, he swung his weapon and cleanly slashed the dragon in two. Watching this unfold, the girl was impressed that Rude had managed to split the dragon apart with a single slash. Moments later, after Rude had slashed the dragon in two and the situation had finally begun to calm down, he could be seen tending to the injured adventurers. Using his thread manipulation skill, Rude sealed the wounds of the guildmaster of Golar, but despite his efforts, he struggled to treat everyone as nearly all of the adventurers had suffered severe injuries during the battle. Rude explained to the woman that he had provided first aid and done everything he could to help the injured, but healing them was proving difficult because most of their wounds were deep and serious. Hearing this, the woman pointed out that everyone except for herself and Rude was badly injured. She added that if they did not receive proper treatment soon, it would be difficult for the two of them alone to carry so many wounded people and escape from the abyss. The woman then asked Rude whether they should wait for reinforcements, transport the injured adventurers to town one by one, or find another way to call for help. However, as she was speaking, Rude suddenly felt that something was wrong. A sharp pain spread throughout his entire body, causing him to cry out in agony. Seeing this, the woman informed him that the backlash was finally beginning to take effect. She explained that she had forcibly controlled the mana within him to temporarily strengthen him, but his body was now reaching its limit and could no longer withstand the strain. As the woman finished speaking, a voice suddenly echoed through the area, addressing the two of them. Both Rude and the woman were startled when they heard it, as the voice belonged to none other than the dragon they had defeated only moments earlier. Filled with fury, the dragon cursed the two of them and declared that it would not allow them to leave, adding that if nothing else, it would take their lives along with its own. As the dragon spoke, the ground began shaking violently, causing both Rude and the woman to grow concerned about what was happening around them. Looking up at the ceiling, which was beginning to collapse, Rude realized that the labyrinth itself was falling apart and informed the woman of what he had noticed. Upon seeing the situation, the woman immediately understood what was happening and explained that the dragon had been acting as a substitute for the labyrinth core, and now that it had been killed, the labyrinth was beginning to collapse. She urgently told Rude that they needed to escape as quickly as possible. Rude, however, was conflicted. Although he knew they had to flee, he was unwilling to abandon the injured adventurers behind. While he was struggling with that decision, he suddenly noticed a massive piece of debris falling toward Alicia, who was still lying helplessly on the ground. Without hesitation, Rude rushed forward to protect her from danger. Fortunately, he reached her in time and managed to save her before the debris could strike. As he held Alicia in his arms, she slowly opened her eyes and softly called out Rude's name. Hearing Alicia's voice, Rude told her that he had defeated the wise dragon and that the only thing left for them to do now was escape from a labyrinth. He carefully helped Alicia into a sitting position, and while coughing, Alicia remarked that it was exactly what she had expected from Rude, adding that she had always believed he would emerge victorious. However, seeing her condition, Rude could not help but worry and asked whether she was all right. Alicia let out a faint chuckle and explained that she had completely run out of mana and was unable to move. She then told Rude that he should leave her behind and escape on his own. Otherwise, both of them would end up dying in the collapsing labyrinth. Upon hearing those words, Rude became furious and demanded to know how she could even suggest such a thing, as there was no chance that he would abandon her. As he looked around, he could see the situation rapidly worsening, with more and more sections of the labyrinth beginning to collapse. At that moment, Rude cursed himself and blamed himself for their predicament, believing that if he had managed to deal with the dragons sooner, the adventurers would not have suffered such severe injuries and would still have been able to move on their own. The woman shouted at Rude, warning him that if they did not hurry, they would all be buried alive within the collapsing labyrinth. However, Rude shouted back that he could not simply run away, as there was no way he could abandon his comrades. Upon hearing his answer, the woman decided to leave, and as she ran off, she told Rude that although she liked his personality, the choice he was making was the wrong one and that it would ultimately lead to his death. Watching her retreat, Rude began to panic and thought to himself that if things continued like this, all of them would be buried alive. He considered carrying Alicia and escaping the labyrinth with her, believing that at the very least he could save her. However, the moment that thought crossed his mind, he remembered the faces of the comrades who had fought alongside him against the wise dragon. Because of that, he immediately changed his mind and told himself that he could never leave the others behind and escape with only Alicia, as he knew that doing so would not be the right thing. Desperately searching for a solution, Rude began thinking of a way to save everyone. While he was doing so, Alicia called out to him and urged him to run, explaining that she believed that was what their comrades would have wanted. Moments later, Lankars also spoke up and told Rude the very same thing, urging him to escape from the labyrinth while he still could. Rude was surprised to hear Lankars' voice, but Lankars immediately spoke up and told him that if he intended to continue living as an adventurer, there would be many occasions when he would lose comrades. Raising his voice, Lankars added that if those who had the chance to survive refused to live on, then what pride could those who died possibly take in their sacrifice? Hearing those words, Rude understood what Lankars was trying to tell him, but he still could not accept the idea of abandoning his comrades and escaping the labyrinth alone. Meanwhile, the monsters of the labyrinth began emerging from the surrounding passages and moving toward the adventurers. Seeing this, Ebert warned everyone that the monsters were starting to gather. Rude, however, drew his sword and loudly declared that he would not leave anyone behind and that he would not allow anyone to die. He continued repeating those words over and over again, as if trying to convince both himself and the others. Watching him, Alicia struggled to stand and once again urged Rude to flee while he still had a chance. However, Rude refused to listen to either Alicia or Lankars. Instead, he charged forward and attacked the monsters that were advancing toward them. As Rude cut down the approaching monsters, he shouted in anger that he was not going to run away and leave everyone behind. He declared that he had been called a scavenger and looked down upon for most of his life. Rude then turned his attention to Alicia and told her that when she had invited him to join her party and accepted the secret he had been carrying, he had been genuinely happy. He further added that when the guild had also accepted him, he had been equally happy because, for the first time, he felt that he had comrades who trusted him and acknowledged his existence. Because of that, Rude firmly declared that he would never abandon his comrades and escape on his own. Hearing those words, everyone was taken by surprise and could hardly believe that Rude valued them so highly. As he spoke, Rude remembered the words of an adventurer he deeply admired, who had once told him that no matter how difficult or painful things became, he should never give up. Recalling those words, Rude raised his voice and declared that none of them should ever give up. Alicia and the others were deeply moved by what he had said, but at that very moment, something suddenly caught everyone's attention. To their shock, it was the wise dragon itself, still standing before them despite the tremendous damage it had already suffered. Upon seeing the wise dragon standing before him once again, Rude cursed aloud and reaffirmed to himself that he would never give up. At that moment, the wise dragon let out a deafening roar and launched an attack, but Rude effortlessly dodged it and leaped into the air with his sword in hand, preparing to deliver a powerful strike. However, just as he was about to attack, the dragon snapped its jaws and bit down on one of Rude's arms, preventing him from completing his attack. Seeing this, Alicia called out to him in alarm, but Rude refused to surrender. Telling himself that he would not give up simply because he had been caught, he immediately activated his skill, Self-Cut, and severed the arm that was trapped in the dragon's mouth. After landing on the ground, Rude picked up the sword lying nearby with his remaining hand and once again reminded himself that he would not give up. The moment he did so, he activated another skill, Regeneration, and his severed arm instantly grew back. Gripping his sword with both hands once more, Rude let out a loud roar and charged toward the wise dragon. He successfully drove his sword through the dragon's body and immediately followed up by activating another skill, Wrapped Lightning, causing powerful currents of electricity to surge through the dragon. As he unleashed the attack, Rude desperately hoped that this strike would finally be enough to bring the dragon down once and for all. However, the situation did not unfold as Rude had hoped. Despite everything he had thrown at the wise dragon, it was still alive. At that moment, the dragon repeatedly muttered the same word, massacre, making it clear that it intended to kill every adventurer present within the labyrinth. Rude was stunned that even after giving everything he had and unleashing a multitude of attacks, the dragon still refused to fall. The realization left him in a state of shock, as he no longer knew what else he could do. Nevertheless, the battle continued. The dragon suddenly launched a counterattack that struck Rude and sent him flying backward at tremendous speed. However, just as he was about to crash into a wall, his momentum abruptly stopped. Opening his eyes to see who had caught him and prevented him from suffering even more serious injuries, Rude was surprised to find himself being held by a person clad in medieval armor. Confused by the stranger's sudden appearance, Rude wondered who the individual was. The armored figure then spoke up and told Rude that he had done well. He further reassured him that there was no need to worry anymore and promised that all of them would make it out of the labyrinth alive. The adventurer then spoke to the dragon and remarked that it was pitiful for a being like it to have failed its reincarnation and ended up being parasitized by other monsters. Hearing those words, the wise dragon roared in fury and immediately activated one of its skills. In an instant, numerous vines burst from the ground and surrounded both the adventurer and Rude. Seeing the situation unfold, Rude realized that they were in a difficult position. However, just as he was thinking that, the vines shot toward them, only for the adventurer to effortlessly slash them apart. Taking advantage of the brief distraction created by the vines, the wise dragon launched itself toward the adventurer and unleashed a powerful attack. Yet it was completely ineffective, as the adventurer reacted instantly and stopped the dragon's attack with a single hand.